Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, and I got a World War III alert. We got a World War III alert, but before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, this disgusting, lunatic, war-hungry maniac who's been pushed by the Zionist Trump, he's going to get everybody killed. He feels inferior to Putin. Putin tired of his shit, too. We're going to look at that. He acting like he's mad at Putin. Boy, please. Putin ain't worried about you. But since he can't really play tough with Putin, he is going to take us to World War III in Iran. This is very dangerous. Let's get right into the content. But Trump is a...
Good day. This is Dimitrios Scaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Kalamata, Greece on March 30th, 2025. In January of this year, Donald Trump returned to the White House with grand promises of peace. He claimed that he was determined to stop all wars. I repeat, all wars. So far, however, on Donald Trump's watch, the U.S. government has ended no wars. Even worse, it has resumed or escalated at least two of them and might well be on the verge of igniting the mother of all wars. Before we take a closer look at the peacemaker's performance since he returned to the White House in January, let's examine.
He's finna start World War III because they're gonna attack Iran because Iran is not accepting none of his demands. Iran already warned them all the U.S. troops gonna be removed from the Middle East. Iran is done with the talking. It's just Trump talking, but he's been moving nuclear bombers, and that's very disrespectful that the U.S. got the audacity to move nuclear bombers to Diego Garcia base. For what? Iran don't have no nuclear. You make a country get nuclear weapons. Remember all that? Why is Russia trying to bully? Remember all that shit? Bully a smaller country, Ukraine. And these people trying to bully Iran. You sending your nuclear bombers over there. See, this is why Kim Jong-un got nuclear weapons right now, because these dirty bastards. But why are they not playing tough with Kim? Because they don't want to die immediately. But the Middle East is going to be the place. All this shit goes down. Trump just don't understand that. What he thinks is going to happen to all his business deals in the Middle East? He won't have no business deals in the Middle East once this shit pop off. It's going to be over for him. And he got played by the fucking Zionists like a chump.
Examine the record of the first Trump administration. As I've said many times, you are what your record says you are. So the record of the first Trump administration should give us a strong indication, at least the strongest that we can find.
We the only ones really give a shit about America. These people give a fuck about Israel, bro. We didn't expose all of the fucking conservatives, bro. We the only ones. We the only ones want to make America great. Trump exposed his fucking self. And all of those people who go along with that bullshit, they're exposing their motherfucking self. They're for end of the world over Israel. Because mark my word, Iran would never, and like the Iranian general's been telling them, you won't be able to attack them and run away. Trump playing a dangerous game, nigga. And China and Russia, they know they not finna let the U.S. do that. They're not finna let the U.S. put a hostile power into Iran that'll be hostile against them. Are you crazy? You think Russia's crazy? Hell no. Like you did Syria? Hell no.
Find about where we are likely headed. Now, Trump never tired of telling us when he was running to be president again that during his first administration, he started no new wars. But is that really true? Well, although the Obama administration sanctioned Syria, conducted surveillance flights over Syria, and directly or indirectly supported murderous jihadists in Syria, the first time that the U.S. officially and directly attacked Syrian government forces was in 2017, under Donald Trump. In the following year, 2018, Trump joined with the UK and France to bomb Syria again, describing that mission, which flagrantly violated international law, as perfect. In that same year, Trump's then Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, announced that the U.S. would maintain an open-ended military presence in Syria, or so he claimed, not only to fight ISIS and al-Qaeda, but also to provide a bulwark against Iranian influence, ensure the departure of the Assad regime, and create conditions for the return of refugees. In 2019, however, Trump himself contradicted Rex Tillerson and other members of his administration when he admitted publicly that the real reason for which US forces were in Syria was to, quote, take the oil, close quote. While I'm on the subject of Rex Tillerson, it seems that some fanboys in the anti-imperialist media believe that Donald Trump is some sort of a rocket scientist who's playing 5D chess and who, at the end of his unfathomable moves, will miraculously cause peace to break out everywhere.
Playing with our life.
I'd like to remind those Trump fanboys that Rex Tillerson himself described Donald Trump as a moron. But I digress. For now, let's put aside the question of whether Trump's first administration started any new wars. In my opinion, being a true peacemaker requires more than avoiding new wars. A true peacemaker not only refrains from starting them, the true peacemaker also brings ongoing wars to an end.
See, all that peacemaker shit because he don't want it with Russia. He didn't want it with Russia, so he has no choice. But he talking shit to Putin right now, but what he said, we're going to look into that he's angry at Putin for disrespecting Zelensky. I can imagine Putin just slapping the shit out that dude. Like, oh, who the fuck you talking to, bro? Don't play crazy with Putin, fam. I told you he gonna lose. Putin ain't. That's why Putin went talk to the troops today. We're gonna look at that, and he already told Russia what to do. Fuck, he don't care because you already see Trump as a Zionist puppet, and they already waiting on you to make that Iranian move because they got something over there waiting on your dumb ass. They waiting on you to do that,
especially those that are unjust and illegal. Now, what ongoing U.S. wars did Donald Trump terminate during his first administration? During the first Trump administration, Trump made lots of noises about ending the brutal, corrupt, and interminable war in Afghanistan, but he never did so. Even worse, under Trump, the U.S.
Taliban. I got that for you. Threatening the Taliban that he's demanding all of the weapons back that was left there. I'm just like, you stupid. What you gonna do? What are you gonna do to the Taliban? We're going to bomb them. Now, how dumb is that? You just got your butt kicked by them. Now they got all those weapons. You going to go back and take them? No, you can't. But you see, Trump is out of his mind. Taliban say they wouldn't talk business with the U.S. Business. You ain't getting no weapons back. You want to buy some resources? That's how Taliban already know. Man, please. They just beat you. They didn't have the weapons. Now they got all of your weapons. And you talking about they better give them back. That's called the spoils of war. When you lose, that's what happened. But see, he's in a position where he the president when it don't really mean too much of nothing in the world no more. You wasted all of your power. You can't throw your weight around. But I thought you was going to take care of the Houthis. You see, he trying to move on to something else because that fell flat. But all they're good at is destroying shit. They don't give a fuck about winning no wars. Like Edward Snowden said, Julian Assange, endless wars is what they want. But we're going to get put to an end if they bomb Iran. Iran is ready to just... If the global economy crash, they done fucked up all y'all pensions. You understand this? If the global economy crash, the people will seize your shit. You better pay attention. They will see you won't have shit in the bank. If people make a bank run, you're not gonna get your money out of there. This Donald Trump playing with y'all livelihood, bro.
Air Force went hog wild on bombing Afghanistan. In 2019, the U.S. forces dropped a record number of bombs on the devastated country, more than during any year in the prior 10-year period. In late 2021, a few months before the Biden administration and its European vassals finally succeeded in provoking Russia's military intervention into Ukraine, Biden himself withdrew U.S. forces from Afghanistan. Within days, the Taliban swept back to power. Much of the reason that the Taliban returned to power so swiftly is that the regime that Bush, Obama, and yes, Donald Trump had propped up for nearly 20 years was brutal and corrupt and enjoyed virtually no popular support. Indeed, that regime could fairly be described as a narco-dictatorship. In my view, the timing of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan was not coincidental. I believe that the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan in late 2021 to prepare for its proxy war against Russia. Basically, the U.S. military needed to reallocate its assets to Europe from Afghanistan so that it could sustain the coming proxy war against the Russian Federation. Whatever Biden's motivation may have been for withdrawing from Afghanistan, Trump criticized Biden vehemently for the chaotic nature of the US withdrawal. But Trump never offered a remotely plausible explanation for why he himself did not implement an organized withdrawal from Afghanistan during his first administration. Elsewhere in West Asia, Trump's policies were even more dangerous, more imperialist, and more pro-war. For example, Trump recognized Israel's annexation of the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. He did so in his first administration, despite the fact that almost the entire international community recognized Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights to be a grotesque violation of international law. Furthermore, Trump continued to provide billions of dollars of military aid to Israel and moved the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, even as Israeli forces gunned down Palestinians in Gaza during the Great March of Return. The Great March of Return was a peaceful protest mounted by Palestinian refugees who have a right to return to their homeland under international law. During the Great March of Return, Israeli snipers shot thousands of unarmed Palestinians, including medics, journalists, women, children, and disabled persons. This all happened under Trump's watch from 2018 to 2019. But Trump did not stop there. His much-touted Abraham Accords pushed Washington's Arab vassals to normalize relations with Israel's apartheid regime without making any provision for the creation of a Palestinian state or for the protection of Palestinian human rights. There is an undeniable link between the Abraham Accords and the genocide Israel is now perpetrating in Palestine. By pushing Washington's Arab vassals to normalize with Israel without ensuring the creation of a Palestinian state, Trump delivered, whether wittingly or unwittingly, an unambiguous message of despair to the Palestinian people. That message was that the US government considered the two-state solution to be dead and was now committed to the permanent subjugation of the Palestinian people. Predictably, Palestinians in Gaza got the Trump memo and responded by attacking Israel on October 7, 2023. Israel then used the October 7th attacks as a pretext for implementing its final solution, a genocide in Gaza and the ethnic cleansing of the occupied West Bank. Undoubtedly, Palestinians living in the 1948 boundaries of Israel are next. Now, even if we ignored the fact that Trump currently supports Israel's starvation of Gazans and currently provides Israel the bombs it requires to obliterate the civilian population of Gaza, Trump would still bear enormous responsibility for the genocide, precisely because of his much ballyhooed Abraham Accords. Now, there's then the issue of the first Trump administration's approach to Iran. The policies of the first Trump administration toward that country were destined, like all aspects of his first administration's foreign policy, to promote war and chaos in West Asia. In 2019, in an illegal drone strike in Baghdad, the first Trump administration murdered Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani. That strike killed not only Soleimani, but also some key officials of Iraq's government. Inevitably, Iran responded to Trump's murder of Soleimani by striking a US military base in Iraq. In a remarkable act of restraint, however, Iraq's government warned the Trump administration beforehand that it was going to attack that military base. As a result, no US soldiers were killed. Now, if Iran's government had not shown that restraint, and if US soldiers had been killed in the retaliatory attack, Trump almost certainly would have launched an all-out war against Iran with potentially devastating consequences for the region and indeed for the global economy. During his first administration, Trump's provocations against Iran did not stop there. In May 2018, Trump withdrew the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. The JCPOA imposed severe restrictions on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. It was well designed to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. At the time that the Trump administration withdrew the US from the JCPOA, the International Atomic Energy Agency certified that Iran was complying with the deal. In fact, Iran continued to comply with the deal for months after the Trump administration withdrew from it, in the hope that the other signatories to the deal would be able to provide to Iran sufficient sanctions relief. And it was only after it became clear that they could not do so or would not do so that Iran stopped complying with the severe restrictions under this JCPOA. Not only was Iran complying with the terms of the JCPOA, but Trump refused to acknowledge at any time during his saber-rattling against the Islamic Republic that Israel itself possessed a nuclear arsenal, or that Israel is the only state in West Asia that is not a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Trump, by the way, has just released limited documentation relating to the JFK assassination. That documentation confirmed that during his time in office, JFK was deeply and justifiably concerned that Israel was seeking to develop a nuclear arsenal. The newly released JFK documents also reveal that a rogue within JFK's administration, James Angleton, was committed to helping Israel obtain nukes. Now, following Trump's release of the latest batch of documents relating to the JFK assassination, journalist Sam Husseini, whom I have previously interviewed on Reason to Resist, asked a White House spokesperson whether the Trump administration was finally prepared to admit that Israel's genocidal regime has nuclear weapons. Here's what happened.
That's where we're going to go. And in the back, did I hear JFK? Because interestingly, no one, we haven't brought that up yet, so let's give that a try here. Who is JFK? So who keeps saying JFK?
Excellent, thank you.
In the back. All right, let's do it.
The JFK assassination is obviously back in the news, and Jefferson Morley of JFK Facts was on Bill O'Reilly's show, analyzing some of the documents that the Trump administration has released. One of the revelations that he discussed was the fact that James Angleton, the CIA counterintelligence chief, had relied on Israelis as part of his intelligence gathering operations, which included monitoring Oswald prior to the assassination.
It's indisputable that he kept him under surveillance for 4 years, from 1959 to 1963. These new documents point to an Israeli connection using Israeli agent to monitor Oswald.
As you may be aware, JFK in the summer of 1963 was deeply concerned with Israel acquiring nuclear weapons. He had sent a series of letters to Ben-Gurion, Israel's founding prime minister, demanding that Israel allow inspectors. Ben-Gurion resigned just when he was pressed on the issue by JFK.
Something I can say to this.
Yeah, I do. I got a question for you.
Right.
Israel continued stalling the inspections, and JFK was, of course, assassinated in November. Every president since has adopted Israel's policy of refusing to acknowledge the existence of Israel's nuclear arsenal. My question to you is, will this administration finally do so?
Boy, we went from JFK and then to now Israel's
will you
nuclear
acknowledge
arsenal.
Israel has nuclear weapons?
I understand. Here's what I will tell you about the JFK files.
I'm not
there's
asking
about 80.
excuse
me, sir.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. About 80,000 pages of unredacted records related to the Kennedy assassination are currently being released, and I think that they've finished at this point by order of President Trump. We know that also, as I'd been asked before, if there was any other material anywhere, this is it. This is all the material. It's out, and again, unredacted, and so that's good news. For my generation, this is also good news. Certainly, as you grow up with that kind of a dynamic that happened in this country. And now, of course, we happily can say that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is contributing to the nature of our nation and making a difference as well. As far as the speculation and conspiracy theories about what was happening regarding that assassination and in the decades that followed, I have no comment for you, and nor am I going to speculate or comment on that. But I appreciate you being here and asking that at the end. Yes, sir. Go ahead, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
America first.
Yeah, please. Let's keep going. You're.
Thank you, Tammy. On Bangladesh, I have.
These people don't give a damn about America.
In my view, one can hardly imagine something more dangerous to humanity than putting nuclear weapons into the hands of a diabolical, genocidal regime like that of Israel. Yet Trump, the alleged peacemaker, refuses even to acknowledge that Israel has nuclear weapons. Instead, Trump seems hell-bent on provoking a war with a state in West Asia that does not, even by the US government's own admission, currently possess a single nuclear weapon. This brings us finally to the region of Eastern Europe. In Ukraine, Trump's first administration continued its commitment to escalating conflicts wherever it found them. Trump's predecessor, Barack Obama, had refused to send lethal weapons to Ukraine on the basis that any military conflict there would end in Ukraine's defeat, which is precisely, by the way, what is happening. As Obama put it, in that part of the world, Russia had escalation dominance. Now, for all of his egregious sins, it was Obama, not Trump, who first acknowledged publicly that Ukraine was not a core interest of the United States, but that Ukraine was a core interest of the Russian Federation. In 2018, Trump reversed Obama's decision not to provide lethal weapons to Ukraine by approving the sale of US-made javelins to the country. In 2019, Trump upped the ante by approving the sale of a lot more lethal weapons to Ukraine. Arguably, however, the most provocative action that Trump took with respect to Russia during his first administration was not the sale of lethal weaponry to Ukraine. It was the withdrawal of the United States from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Now, I've had some issues with Scott Ritter lately, but there are a few independent commentators out there who know as much about the INF Treaty as does the former weapons inspector. Scott was one of the first U.S. weapons inspectors to take on the responsibility of verifying the Soviet Union's.
And Putin laughed at Trump for doing that because he made the super weapon, the Oshnik, the super weapon that they really fear now. So U.S. did that thinking they was outsmarting Russia, and Putin just used it against them.
Compliance with the INF Treaty. As Scott explained in a 2022 op-ed in Consortium News, Trump's withdrawal from the INF Treaty was a disaster. He wrote, "The U.S. seeks only unilateral advantage. Until this is changed, there can be no meaningful arms control interaction between the U.S. and Russia. Not only will the New START treaty expire in February 2026, but it is also unlikely the major verification component of the treaty, on-site inspections, will be revived between now and then. Moreover, it is impossible to see how a new arms control agreement to replace the expired New START treaty could be negotiated, ratified, and implemented in the short time remaining to do so. There is no trust between Russia and the U.S. when it comes to arms control. With no treaties, there is no verification of reality. Both the U.S. and Russian arsenals will become untethered from treaty-based constraint, leading to a new arms race for which there can be only one finishing line: total nuclear war." In a similar vein, in 2020, nuclear weapons expert Marc Finot, an associate fellow at the Geneva Center for Security Policy, stated, "It is a pity that the United States has terminated this major stabilizing arms control agreement achieved during the Cold War under the pretext of Russian violations that could have been settled between both countries. The prohibition of intermediate range missiles, both nuclear and non-nuclear, made Europe much safer, lowering the threshold of nuclear war, and is still needed." On November 21st of last year, Russia unexpectedly fired an intermediate range missile of a conventional nature at the Ukrainian town of Dnipro. It was the first used in a theater of war. Until now, this type of missile had only been test fired. Named Oreshnik, the IRBM missile or
that Oshnik super weapon that Putin said they'll never be able to defend themselves against is the best weapon ever made. Total devastation. There's nothing you can do about it. No air defense can protect you. It can hit anywhere in the world. Now, like I told you, Putin used it and said the only reason they was able to build it and manufacture it and properly test it is because Trump pulled out of that goddamn arms treaty thinking it was going to help the U.S. How could it help you? Russia's waiting on Trump to keep making stupid mistakes.
Intermediate range ballistic missile took the West by surprise, as this weapon was not officially part of Moscow's arsenal. As Le Monde noted in January of this year, Russia's use of Oreshnik has caused European nations to consider the development of their own IRBMs. For this new arms race, my friends, the world can thank the supposed peacemaker in the White House today, Donald Trump. In conclusion, I have long said, as I said at the outset of this report, that you are what your record says you are. Now, we all know that our leaders frequently lie. Trump has always been a rather extreme example of political mendacity. A rational person, knowing that our governments are run by pathological liars, would judge these people by their actions and not by their rhetoric. Based on the record, the actions of the Trump administration the first time around, why would any sane person believe Donald Trump's claim that he is committed to peace? In part 2 of this report, we'll examine how Trump's current policies are propelling the
Angeles, Bakersfield, San Jose, Toledo, Ohio, and Toronto, Ontario. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. Well, people don't realize that Iran has hypersonic missiles, which the United States doesn't even possess. They have actual hypersonic missiles, and they could do a lot of devastation, certainly to Israel. And I saw a headline. Is it? Do you know?
No, not just to Israel. They tired of that. They don't. Israel is a puppet nation. They say the U.S. is going to get it. No U.S. in the Middle East. If Trump throw a rock, if an apple rolled across their border and it came from the U.S., they're gonna bomb everything.
You know, have any insight into this? Iran and Russia have been closely aligned. Did they sign a treaty like the equivalent of our NATO treaty? So if someone attacks Iran, it's as if they attacked Russia. So if we attack Iran, it's like we're starting a World War III with Russia, right? Is that true?
And that might be the only reason why.
This is the deal that they signed. It is 90 million Iranians, millions of them ready to fight. The deal they signed is that if the U.S. and its allies attack the Iranians, the Russians is going to do what the U.S. and Europe just did in Ukraine. Russia's going to send them all the weapons that they ever wanted, advanced weapons, to defeat the U.S. and their allies. And they're going to let the Iranians kick their ass with advanced weapons. And they're not going to leave the Iranians alone. They're going to send trainers and all that shit. So it's going to be like they fighting the Russian equipment. They're going to be fighting Iranians, though. That's the defense pact they signed.
Trump doesn't go ahead with an all-out attack on Iran. It's not as powerful a treaty as the NATO treaty, but it is a military cooperation agreement, which means that no member of it can assist in any way any party that is attacking.
NATO is a bunch of cowards who they need bodies. They need, if one person attacked, they need everybody to go and fight like they did in Afghanistan, Iraq. But they want 10, 13, 14 different militaries. See, Russia's making deals with nations. That's not how Russia operates. You need to do your own fighting. Russia going to give you weapons like they did in Africa. They're going to give you all kind of advanced weapons. You fight. We're going to make sure you don't lose. That's the deal. Not they sending in hundreds of thousands of Russians. No, that's not good business. That's the deals they signed. You got to be willing to fight and die for your country, and then they're going to support you.
One of the signatories of the treaty. It provides military cooperation, and that's already at a very high level. Iran has been receiving constantly, daily, anti-aircraft potential, and Russian anti-aircraft is the best in the world. It's been receiving economic and military cooperation with both.
Man, you're not going to be just flying over Iran. But if those planes go in Iran, they're going to get shot down. That's just that. But that's not the point, because you might have some suicide bombers ready to get it. Like, if you send any of those planes, Iran, we're going to get into that. They already said they blowing up all the U.S. bases in the Middle East. These people playing with fire. Just imagine, there's some people in the Middle East, they want this. So they just get rid of the West. They don't give a shit. There's people in the Middle East like the Saudis. They don't give a fuck about no Iran. They want this to happen so they can get rid of the U.S. and for Iran to, be destroyed for a little while. They'll rise back up. That's what Donald Trump is a fool. It's the Zionists want this. They don't give a fuck about Israel. That's just a place they colonized. They can go do that shit somewhere else.
Both China and Russia at an accelerated and elevated level. So Russia, China, and Iran are not entirely one, not like Russia and China are one, but they are very close. And it would not be possible for Russia and China to stand by and allow Iran to be completely destroyed. And they will not do so. So that's why I bring up the doomsday clock. We thought that we were off the hook when Trump began to try and wind down the war in Ukraine. But actually, the crisis has merely moved from Europe to the Persian Gulf with all its geostrategic.
Because they noticed their weakness. They noticed they weren't going to defeat Russia. Cool. But they wasn't going to let Russia get away with defeating them in Ukraine. They're going to try to go knock off Iran, which will cripple Russia. It's going to hurt Russia because Russia need Iran to keep the Middle East intact, or Russia will have to send in troops. If the Middle East is on fire, China gets a bunch of oil from the Middle East. China economy will be, see, this is bad business. They can't let Iran fall, and they're not going to let it happen.
Strategic and economic importance, energy importance. We are maybe about to set fire to the biggest powder keg to be found anywhere on the globe.
Again, a big betrayal by Trump and his administration of his campaign promises, things he's been, it's so funny that he said in 2023, he said that Joe Biden doesn't need to be bombing Yemen, that you could end this with a phone call. And then here he is doing this. And it's just a super betrayal. And if you're MAGA and you don't feel betrayed, then you're just a chump. And that's a fact. But listen, I appreciate you making all this time for us. You've been very generous. George Galloway, everybody should check out his show on YouTube, the mother of all talk shows, a great show and a great man. George Galloway, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jimmy. Always a pleasure, an honor.
Okay.
See you in Scotland.
See you in Scotland.
And Brian Berletic. So we're all going to have a conversation. It will be Garland who's going to be hosting this panel discussion. So look, if the case, leave it for people into the embezzlement trial. Illusion, because that's what it is. You bought in her. It's the same thing that is going on in Philippines right now. You all know what they're trying to do to the VP, Sara Duterte, by trying to impeach her, because if she is getting tangled into the legal stuff, she won't be able to run. So what makes that wrong, but makes it right for our current president, who was entangled in legal aspect and yet was able to run for office? Double standards, that's just And speaking of Trump, here is the last thing I want to share with you about Mr. Trump, is that now Mr. Trump is thinking about hinting at a third term. Yeah, he wants to run for office for the third term, which violates the Constitution to begin with. So,
absolutely. He's a fucking
what Mr. Trump is saying now, even though he just took office, for his second term, and he's already begun now the conversation, him and his allies, regarding hinting at the possibility of running for third term. What a joke. But on the other hand, you all know how it is in America. Even though you and I know it's unconstitutional, but yet, don't be surprised there. But we'll become like a monarchy here. So that's ridiculous. So even if the case, leave it for people to decide. Leave it to us in a referendum. This is why, guys, if you notice, in the West, mainly in the US, we don't have a referendums, because they know they don't want to give the voice to the people. All right, let's get into our topic. We're going to be talking about how Iran has issued now a warning to target the Chagos Islands, where San Diego Garcia base is, which is a home. The Chagos Islands basically is home to the U.S. British base, San Diego Garcia. And only this is the condition that if the United States end up attacking Iran, Iran is going to respond. Well, there is a lot to unpack into all this. By the way, guys, for
Iran is telling them, you drop any bombs on anywhere in Iran, we blowing up all of those bases in the Middle East. Diego Garcia, that's getting wiped out. They're not playing.
Just joining us here for the first time, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to put the link to the channel in the chat box, so I will greatly appreciate, because the analysis you are hearing on this channel here is unique to this platform here, is unique to this channel. So if you are enjoying all this, I would greatly appreciate if you can support it, the channel, and subscribe and share it with others. So, now, here's the thing. First of all, it behooves us to understand a little bit of history and a little bit of geography. So I'm going to do geography and history first, then dive into the history, into the analysis aspects of it. So the islands of the Chagos were inhabited by descendants of the African slaves and Indian contractors. Because remember, when you look at the big picture, look where India is, look where the islands are, look where Africa is. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And this population came to be known as the Chagosians. So after the British Indian Ocean Territory, you all remember, was established, because that's when the UK government purchased all the coconut plantations and forcibly relocated the entire Chagosian population to none other than two locations. One of them is Mauritius, and the other one is Seychelles. Yeah, Mauritius and Seychelles. That's where the expelled Chagosians continue to contest the situation surrounding their expulsion, because it wasn't right from the islands. So, and calling the actions of the UK illegal, which was illegal to begin with. And that's why in 1971, Britain leased the Diego Garcia Atoll to the United States for its use as a naval and military base. This is where part of that geography, when you look at it here, I have, even though it's written in Arabic, guys, it's right here in the middle. It says Island of Chagos. Chagos, or Chagos, that is. You have Madagascar to the bottom left, Somalia to the middle here. Then you have Yemen, then Oman, Sultanate of Oman, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and India. So this is what's important to understand. Now, for the history of the Diego Garcia, which is if you look at this, I got a picture for you here from the Google map. It's shaped like a horseshoe, if I may use the term. And this one, that's what the Chagos archipelago. But its history was marked by none other than the Portuguese. Does anybody know what century the Portuguese discovered it? If you know the answer, please type it in the chat box. And once again, I want to get you engaged into the conversation here. We are all learning here. So, does anybody know what century did the Portuguese discover the Chagos Islands? Let me see if any of you, rough estimates. Emmanuel, 15th? No, actually, Bamboo got it. Bamboo Soja got it. On the 16th century. That's when they did. Then who came after them? Does anybody know? If you know a little bit about the history of that part of the world. Who came after the Portuguese? And when? Let's just see again. Christopher Columbus, no. No, not the Dutch. Good try. Good try. Multi-tom-tom, not the Brits, not yet. Not Spain, Army with Harmony, you got it. There is another country in Europe. Francis Tango, not the Netherlands. No, Cecil, you got it. It's the French. The French came after the Portuguese. What century? Does anybody know? 18th century. Multi-tom-tom. You got it. 18th century. That's when it happens. 18th century. That's when the French came after the Portuguese. Now, what happened? So here is, just look and remember in history during this time, that was where the imperialism was very expanded. So you got the Portuguese, you got the French after them, and who specifically for this location. We're not talking about around the world, just this specific location. Then who came after them was the Britain. That's where Britain took control, becoming, and later on becoming eventually a joint venture between the UK and the US base. There is a great academic research on this one. I'm gonna share the link with you. It's too long for me to cover here. You guys can read it later on, but it's an academic paper. I had a chance to read about it some. Now, one thing you need to understand is that the Chagos archipelago was leased by the Americans, leased from the British to the Americans, which, by the way, that's where the attacks on both Iraq and Afghanistan were launched from. And even today, there is a conversation that some of the attacks, even though we are using the aircraft carriers on Yemen, that's where they are originated from. So this is what you need to understand. That's why I thought of the geography. It's important because the Chagos archipelago, it's right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. When you look at the map, once again, just look at that. Connections between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So, and south of the Indian subcontinent, and it's about 2,200 kilometers northeast of Mauritius and 500 kilometers south of the Maldives. And of course, this is what happened. Also, part of that history, you need to understand the role of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. It is very important to understand, or known as the World Court, which is the principal organ of the United Nations. That's the ones that settles legal disputes between states and issue an advisory opinion and legal questions. Now, here is the thing. The court in itself, by the way, when was the court established? Does anybody know? When was the ICJ was established? And there is a reason why I'm saying this for you guys, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. If you can tell me the year. If you happen to know. 1949? No, before that. Multi-tom-tom. Matt Backey, you got it. 1945. That's when it was established. And very important because it was by the UN Charter that began its work in 1946. And the thing is, the status of the ICJ, or International Court of Justice, is similar to that of its predecessor, because it was one before that. And of course, it is located in The Hague and in the Netherlands at the World Palace, which what you are looking at the picture. Now, here is the important thing. And the reason I'm saying this, let me remove this one here. The reason I'm saying this, because Britain has been ordered to pay what we call them. I draw a blank on the word. Reparations for the locals, because they illegally evacuated or get them out of their locations. So of course Britain refused. Yeah, Britain refused to do so. And we all know the history of Britain in not only in that part of the world but everywhere else. So anyway, I just want to provide you those insights here before I move forward into my own analysis. So here is the thing. Let me first say thank you quickly here to I am Valentina. Oh, thank you so much for your teachings. Greatly appreciate your support. I am very, very touched by this. Thank you so much, Valentina. Appreciate it. Let me share this with you guys, my own analysis here. the first question you need to think about, if Iran makes these statements of this magnitude, the first question you need to ask is, does it have the capability to follow through? That's the first question. Second question you need to ask is Iran just bluffing, or is it able to follow through with its threat? What do you guys think? Because I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions, guys, because I need to have your input into all this. What do you think? Do you think Iran is bluffing, or it will be able to follow through if attacked? Because remember, there have been some incidents before that Iran decided not to react. And I can understand why, as one who dealt with this this domain, in understanding why countries sometimes do react and others don't. So in your opinion, regarding this specific threat, in your opinion, do you think, will Iran follow through, or is it just bluffing? Let me just see your answer here, if you could share. Yes or no? Oh, Abel Malcolm, you say sort of. Okay. Yes, Iran. I am Valentina. You said, where are you? Man, this screen moves so fast. You said, my apologies here, guys. You said, I am, yeah, they will follow through. Iran will follow through. Iran, Ramzi, you say Iran can hit. Based on Iran hypersonic win. That's the key. Kevin Baptist, you say ain't bluffing. I see your point. Who else? Abel Malcolm, U.S. attack. Okay. Francis Tango, I thought yes. Okay, you guys got a point there. And I happen to share your opinion on this one here, that Iran will react, will retaliate, will attack San Diego Garcia, or Diego Garcia, rather.
They absolutely will.
Now, the second thing to me, thank you, putting my geopolitical analyst hat on, is that the idea is, does he have the capabilities to do so? Because targeting the Diego Garcia base will mean what? You have to think big picture. It will mean a complete, yeah, and I use the term carefully, complete disruption. Notice I didn't say destruction, but rather disruption of American bases and fleet, not only in Diego Garcia, but in West Asia or Middle East. And when you think about Diego Garcia's geostrategic location in Indian Ocean, its presence as a home of the most important logistical facilities and the strategic weapons. Remember what we have in that base. So what we have the likes of most of the bombers. As a matter of fact, we moved now about, to my knowledge, about 6 bombers.
And that's disgusting.
So why did we do that?
Because we're trying to bully Iran.
No.
They ain't going for it.
Even though some of the operations against Yemen are launched or initiated from the Garcia base. But again, you think about the logistical importance and the geostrategic importance of the base and its role. Because
Iran been showing they got underground missiles. Fuck having missiles silos. They got underground missile bases they've been releasing week by week just to show the U.S. like, hey, we don't give a damn about you sending your bombers over there. We're gonna blow that base up. The Russians have been showing people the Shahad drones that devastate Ukraine. Those come from Iran. Those come from Iran. Thousands of those is just gonna swarm all the U.S. bases. And tens of thousands of missiles. The U.S. will never be able to shoot all that shit down. See, that's the thing. You're not going to be able to shoot everything down. And once those missiles get to dropping on those bases, and Iran just said it today, it's 50,000 U.S. troops spread throughout the Middle East. Iran already said all of those people become targets when this war starts.
Because the base plays a role, has always did. I was familiar with the 2 locations, one in Iraq, one in Afghanistan. Most of the operations were initiated from Diego Garcia. And this is also Diego Garcia, kind of the base, serves as a coordinator between both US air and naval assets in the region. And that's what I'm saying. It extending all the way from the Indian Ocean to the Arabian Sea and to the Arabian and Red Seas in the Gulf water. So take a look at the map once again. The map will give you an idea. Just look. There is importance, why it's important to understand this kind of geography, because it put things in perspective for you to understand. Look at this one here. Same, the Gulf and the Arabian Sea. That's why it's important to understand this one here. So, now, when you think about the US, and if this to move forward, and I'm going to get into what kind of weapons Iran has in its possession that allowed it to issue a statement like this, because this is not a, in my opinion, this is not a bluffing. You don't bluff on something you can deliver on similar to this. This is a major, and he only convinced me personally. And again, I did the research about Iran. I wrote a book.
Iran don't want to do this because this is their nuclear bomb. They're gonna crash the economy, block the strait. Y'all won't be driving no. If this happened, y'all won't be driving no cars. It's gonna cost too much to put gas in your car. You won't be driving. See, Iran got some cars to play, and the U.S. will not be an empire anymore because they won't have no bases in the Middle East. So Trump talking stupid about blowing up some nuclear sites. You're gonna lose everything. Trying to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear power. That doesn't make sense. You're gonna lose everything in the Middle East.
Book, and I'm gonna share an excerpt with you from the book specifically for this aspect. That tells me specifically that Iran has in its possession some type of advanced systems that can challenge the US. Otherwise, they won't say this. There is no way. There is no way. So, and it becomes now one of the geopolitical context to think about within this statement. Like I always say, in international relations, context matters. The context of this from a global geopolitical aspect. You know what it is? Is the reduction of the significance of the American presence in West Asia or Middle East. Because here is the thing. If this to move forward, which by the way, some of you, not many, I shouldn't say many, some of you have argued, and I couldn't agree more, that Iran reserves the right to defend itself if attacked in a country. It's under international law. That makes perfect sense. And this is why, if attacked, all the US bases in West Asia or Middle East becomes a foregone conclusion that they will be a target. And that in itself will reduce or degrade completely US presence in the Middle East or West Asia. It's already declining, but this one will do it completely. That's it. And this is why I am saying, when Trump issues these threats and all that stuff, I don't think so the man can sit and think pragmatically, logically, as to the consequences. Iran of today is not Iran of 15 years ago. I said the same arguments about China. And the reason for that is what I see also coming regarding China. And that's why I decided to take down that video. And I'm going to do the conversation with Professor Anna Mellendog, because I gave her my word. You know, I follow through with what I say. I gave her my word that I will do the foreign policy segments about Philippines with her. Then I'll do my own analysis about where I see things going regarding China. And that's the same arguments I can make. So it behooves China to start to think about, you can't be negotiating with the Americans anymore because they can't be trusted. That's one. And second, if you don't show force, we're not going to understand. Only if you show force. Look at now what's going on in Ukraine. Even though we do know that American presence in Ukraine is there. I was there. I saw what I needed to see. So within the geopolitical realm, you're gonna have to think in terms what these statements by Iran means. Because if you know anything about the history of Iran, Iran is some sort of, throughout its history, has always been very, very concentrated on ensuring its borders, its country. It goes way back into the Persian era. That's how it's always been. And we don't understand that part of history. And this is why if Iran end up targeting Diego Garcia, because this one, it's going to put the US is going to put its weapons, especially the key strategic weapons. You're going to look about the radars. You're going to look about the air. You're going to look at into the naval capabilities. From now on, this will be in a major challenge. Because here is the thing. Iran already won. Not on the battlefield yet, but it won already the information aspect. Because now the Americans are thinking, we are our crosshair from whatever type of weapons Iran has. That is what's important to understand. Because once again, let me repeat this. Iran's targeting of Diego Garcia is going to place now the US assets in West Asia, in the Middle East, in addition to those in Diego Garcia. That includes weapons, that includes radars, air and naval capabilities. All of them are crosshairs. And why is this important? Why is this important? Like I asked earlier, if Iran issued this statement, it must have something regarding this. Well, let me share some pictures with you about the types of weapons. So I'm gonna share with you one particular. Actually, I'm gonna.
Iran is. I done played a live on here where I showed y'all all the different type of weapons. Iran is a missile superpower. The West just don't want to admit it. Iran is a missile superpower. None of them European armies. The U.S. is the only one that even got a chance to fight Iran. No Europe, Britain, France, none of them puppet nations could ever fight Iran. Iran would devastate them. They all need NATO in the U.S., but Iran is a missile superpower. The U.S. needs to understand that they don't have a good air force. They have a good missile force and drone force and asymmetrical warfare. Iran has built this whole military for this one fight. This is the one fight they've been waiting to have. They ready for it.
I'm gonna go back to a previous picture that I shared with you back then, guys. You remember this one here that I told you about Iran ballistic and cruise missiles? It extends all the way to about now 2,000. Okay.
Now just look at all those different missiles. Look at all those different missiles. And remember, they don't buy these missiles. They're not Ukraine. People don't have to ship the missiles into Iran. No, they built them themselves. They have hundreds of thousands of missiles. They don't have nothing to do with the tens of thousands of drones. And they're going to use all of them in this one war. Man, the U.S., there's no way. They can't beat the U.S. in the U.S. They damn sure can beat the U.S. anywhere near their damn border. That's a fact.
Give credit here to CSIS. Now, I shared another picture about the ballistic. There is something that is not disclosed here. And of course, it was for a reason, because this one was done way back. So this one only shows the extension to 2,500 kilometers. These are Iran ballistic missiles. Now, for Diego Garcia, what Iran intends to use is this type of ballistic missile. It's called Hyper or Karshmar 4 ballistic missile, right here. What's important about this? What's important about this missile is that it can travel at a speed over Mach 16. When you go over Mach 16, and I'm not going to get into the technical aspects of it. I told you I will share a few things based on my previous work and all that. This is one of these opportunities. I don't get a chance to do this much, but this one here, that's why I was very excited to do this for you. When you think about Mach 16, so because Mach 16 will go outside the atmosphere in comparison to, let's say, Mach 8 or Mach 9, which is what Iran has, because Mach 9 go inside the atmosphere. Mach 16, anything above 12, Mach 12 goes outside the atmosphere. And the interesting thing about this particular missile right here, you know what is it? Is that its warhead contains approximately 80 bombs. Yeah, 80 bombs, each weighing about 1,500 kilograms. And it has another dimension to it that's going to have to make us very concerned. It already did. And you know what? Its trajectory, the trajectory of this Khorramshahr 4, that's the name of it, Khorramshahr. This is part of the Khaybar. The Khaybar. So Khorramshahr 4, its trajectory can be remotely controlled, which means what? It will enable it to bypass the enemy air defenses. So just think about it for a second. And that's why it leads me back to my original question is, if Iran issued these kind of statements, it must have something to back it up. That's why I concur with you when I asked you the first question. Iran is not bluffing on this one, let alone it reserves the right to defend itself.
No, Trump was bluffing. And he
so it behooves us to think this language of threat, you know, and the whole reason, you know what, guys? Trump wanted to threaten Iran if they don't want to negotiate. Well, they don't want to negotiate with you because they don't trust you. And how could they? After what we did to them when we pulled out of GCPOA. And all of a sudden now, you want to renegotiate that particular agreement in addition to its missile defense systems. Well, guess what? The negotiations is not about GCPOA. The negotiations is about Israel, because it's Israel that's telling the US, you need to pressure Iran regarding its missile, because Israel is so concerned. And I am going to be detailing some stuff with you as I move forward. This is the big picture that I need you guys to understand. Now, if we are to talk about just this aspect here of the Khaybar or Khorramshahr 4 ballistic missile, now at least you know one aspect that Iran has. Iran has other types of weapons, which I'm going to share as I move along with here. Now, think about the IRGC, the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force. Yes, there is one entity there. And by the way, I remember, while I'm remembering, I made a mistake last time when I said Qasim Soleimani, not Salami, Soleimani, who we took out in Iraq, was the head of the Quds Force, not IRGC. I made a mistake, and I remembered because one of you made a comment, and I'm glad it did. So it was a slip of the tongue. That makes me human. Anyway, so the IRGC's Aerospace Force. So here is the key. And now again, I'm going to show you one picture. Is this one? It's called Shahid 136B. Take a look. Those are drones, not any types of drones. Okay, here is the important thing to understand about those. The Shahid 136B, those are which what the IRGC Aerospace Force disclosed. So, because this drone is capable of flying for 16 to 20 hours and has an operational range of more than 4,000 kilometers, which means what? Think about it. Just between this one here, guys, okay, and this one's here, that puts everything within range for Diego Garcia base. There's where the military base is. I'm going to show you the big map here. Here is Iran, to those who read Arabic. Here is Iran. Here is the Chagos Islands, and that's where Diego Garcia is. So the distance of those missiles can go up to 4,000. So let that sink in. And this leads me, while I'm remembering, as I said earlier, think about the big picture. This is what you always need to do when it comes down to geopolitics. You can't be looking at just Diego Garcia as the only, that's the only target, but that's it. No, there are others, because you think about the bases. Remember, I told you there are about 50 bases inside West Asia or Middle East that belong to the US. Some of them are small. We call them the FOB, forward operating base, but some of them are major, the likes of, what are the two countries that have a major US presence inside the West Asia or Middle East? Can you name the two countries? Those are major. And as a matter of fact, one of them has links to Diego Garcia. So let me see what you guys can come up with here. And once again, this is just, I need you to be part of the conversation. Two main countries. I'm scrolling down here too. Ramzi. Ramzi, I saw you here, Ramzi. Ramzi, you got it. And I'm talking about inside West Asia or Middle East. Yeah. Bahrain and Qatar. Those are the main ones. Now, there are some of you answered United Arab Emirates. That is correct. Saudi Arabia, that is correct. Jordan, that is correct. Even though not every Jordanians know about it. But the main one I'm talking about is Qatar and Bahrain. Why Qatar and Bahrain? What's in Bahrain? Do you guys know? What type of assets we have in Bahrain? It's well known. And that's what I'm saying. It's tied to Diego Garcia. Navy, which one? Does anybody know exactly? I'm looking for a specific one. Al Udeid base, that's correct. BY, you got it. I knew, guys, you know the things. I know, I just have to get it out of your mind. And that's the beauty of sharing knowledge. BY, you got it, is the Fifth Fleet. Fifth Fleet coordinates with San Diego. I keep calling it San Diego. With Diego Garcia and the Asian Fleet, the Seventh Fleet. Remember, the all coordination right from Diego Garcia. But the Fifth Fleet is in Bahrain, and in Qatar we have the major presence of the base, the largest in the region. And this, why I want you to put in perspective what Iran said about these statements regarding the targeting of Diego Garcia. And like I said earlier, this brings me back to what I said earlier. This is not about just targeting Diego Garcia. And this is not about what the US saying now, we have to force Iran to the negotiating table. No. This is about ensuring that Iran's missile technology has to be dismantled because Israel is concerned. Basically, the bottom line, we are doing all this for Israel. Simple. It's not a secret. It's not a secret. Well, here is the thing that I need to share with you. Something that I didn't want to talk about it previously, because this happened now about a week or so, to my knowledge. I didn't want to talk about it. And the reason why, first of all, I couldn't confirm it. And second, it was one of those very how should I put it? Off the books operation. And this one has to do with Israel attacking a location inside Iran. Yes, Israel did. So, however, And here is where the key comes in. What Israel is saying on a limited basis versus what happened are the opposite. Basically, it was just exaggerating. Why? Because it was a lie, first of all. And second, whatever Israel did as far as the targeting on these locations, it didn't cause any damage. So, and there is a reason for that, which means that Israel didn't go deep inside Iran. It couldn't. Why is this? There is one specific reason: the presence of the Russian military hardware on the ground in Iran. What are we talking about? We're talking about the S-300 and the S-400 missile system, the missile defense systems. So now the challenge for Israel was, because despite this so-called operation on targeting, like I always say, Iran is not Iraq, is not Syria, is not Yemen. What happened is that Israel did not know how to jam this particular system, because that's usually how it works. When you go into an operation, the first thing you do, you're going to have to jam communication. That's the norm. So Israel did not know how to do that. Didn't even know how to read, because to read the signals. That's what I meant. Why? Because the S-400 missile systems have a different capabilities. Yeah. Sorry, Lockheed Martin. Sorry, Raytheon. All the defense missile systems are looks like a child play in comparison to the accuracy of the S-300 and the S-400. And as a matter of fact, Russians now have the S-500. I don't know which country has that. I don't think so any country has that. I do know, to my knowledge, that the Russians have the S-500. And this is why Turkey went ahead and purchased the S-400 despite the objection of the US. Why? It did that because they will be able to lock in on the F-35s, on the F-18s. This is why Israel couldn't go deep inside Iran, unlike what they did in Iraq and what they did in Syria. They want to right in because they didn't have, those two countries didn't have the capability. Iran is different. That is one of the reasons that I need you to defend. So basically, what Israel couldn't do, it couldn't take down those air defenses. So this is what we call in military jargon, the suppression and destruction of enemy air defenses, known as SEAD. SEAD. Suppression and destruction of enemy air defenses. So, and basically, it amounts to destroying the air defenses. So, and this is why I always say, mark my word, Israel will not be able to attack Iran. Yeah, you do some things here and there. Iranians are thinking, are calculating their action, are calculating their move. They are very strategic. And this strategic thinking, it didn't happen yesterday. It didn't happen after the revolution. It goes back to the Persian Empire history. Read about its history and it will make more sense to you. That's why, again, I go back to my original statements when I said Iran issued this statement. It must have something to back it up. And it's enough for Iran to say this, that now the US is concerned about all its presence in West Asia and the Middle East. And if Iran said it's within reach to Diego Garcia, game is over. And that's why I believe, like you, I don't think so Iran is bluffing on this one. Let alone it gives it justification, if attacked, to retaliate. It's within its right. So, and this is why, kind of, to go back to this Israeli attack in Iran, it was nothing. Despite what the Israeli government, the information they are releasing, which is nothing. So that's what forced the Israelis to retreat. They couldn't go any further. So, because here is the thing, and I used to do this in my presentations. You know, when I used to private audiences, I will do this kind of speaking engagements and explain to the audience, to whatever I was allowed or I could say because remember, there are some sensitive aspects that I can share, that I can't share rather. So, and this is when, and I'm going to share the link to those who wants to take a look at the link here, guys. That's to my speaking engagements. So, and I used to explain, because I did this on Iran, I did on China, I did on Russia, I did on the US being entangled in a war like this. And that's when I disclosed when the delivery of the S-300 missile systems and the S-400, the Russians are far superior for what Lockheed Martin and Raytheon provides. There is no comparison. Let alone, they are less expensive. You all remember when I shared with you in the community about Qatar buying drones for $2 billion. $2 billion. So, yeah. MQ-9, I think that's what they believe in. And here is the hard truth. Here is the hard truth that I need you to understand. The Russians and the Chinese defense systems outperform those of the United States. So you look at this technology.
That's a fact.
Or the capabilities that if Iran, within its reach of Diego Garcia, it tells you what you need to know. This is this type of.
I've already spoken on this several times. The reason why other countries, especially Iran, China, Russia, especially Russia and show to Ukraine, their weapon system is far superior to the U.S. Even though we spend way more on our stuff, it's because our defense industry is full of crooks and criminals who take our money and give us crap. We don't never win. Remember, they just lost to the Taliban, so you should be thinking, how do we have advanced the best weapons? We can't even beat these rugged groups of people who don't even have shoes at certain times, like the Houthis. Now, Iran, they have to spend their money on weapons that work, or they could be executed, imprisoned, or they could be toppled and their country devastated by the U.S.
Type of missile. This is it's called Jihad missile. That's only about 1,000 kilometers to my knowledge, or 1,200. And I give credit to Tasneem for this picture. So that makes what? When you have the S-400 missile systems, you know, the B-2 will become also a target. So, and this is why, and as I said, think about the cost of the S-400 missile systems, of the S-300 versus the Patriot missile. The Patriots, we sell them at 4 or 5 times more what the price of the S-300 or S-400. The same thing with F-35, J-20 of the Chinese versus the F-18s or the Su-57, the Russians. They cost far less and more effective. So, and this is why, if you notice, one country right now, why country, I'm going to ask you a question. One country that play both sides, it's now trying to go back to Russia. Can you get? It's going to be challenging. You know, it's India. This is why now you're hearing the tone of voice in the Indian diplomats that they are leaning more towards the camp of China, towards the camp of Russia, because they are realizing that the US is going to just use them and abuse them. But I say, and this is my opinion, I will not trust the Indian government, no matter what they say.
Nope.
Please, guys, make sure to keep the conversation civil here, because I know how some of you feel about India. We're talking about the Indian government, not the Indian people. I know people from India, wonderful people. I'm talking about the government here. So this is why you are now noticing India is now asking Russia for more armaments. And just to go back to my point about Iran, when we think about Iran, like I said before regarding China, and I did share this with you before, when I was during my time in Washington, there were about 18 scenarios regarding a war with China. 17 out of 18 we lost to China. The same thing has been done about Iran.
Iran.
Later on.
Come on, bro. They done played these war games out over and over and over and over and over and over and over. They're still waiting to find a scenario where they can win.
I'm aware of 2 war games. And in both war games, we lost to Iran. This might shock some of you. Yeah, when you see the US moving with the, for example, what is it? Let me show. Yeah, right here. Aircraft carriers and all that stuff. Aircraft carrier is a sitting duck, basically. And Iran has the possession to take that down or to take it out. This is where that concern is. So in both scenarios, that outcome was suggesting, based on a computer simulation, we will lose to Iran. Because remember, Iran of today is not Iran of after revolution. Yeah. Because the first thing you're going to have to think about, what will Iran do? Now that it has those capabilities, it'll take out the air defense systems in Diego Garcia or any location within its range in West Asia or Middle East, because gloves will be off. Yeah, gloves will be off. If Iran is attacked, that means the countries that host US military bases becomes the target, because Iran is going to say, I am targeting US locations. They happen to be on your soil. So, and even we'll go with this hypothetical scenario. And it's not a hypothetical. We're going to be moving the aircraft carrier. Okay? We're going to probably move it into, let's say, I don't know, near Persian Gulf, which will be a mistake anyway. But with what Iran has, you know, they're not gonna waver from targeting that. So, and this is why I need you guys to think in terms of the aircraft carrier. So, how many personnel are on an aircraft carrier? Can you guess a number? Just give me a number, guys. How many sailors do you think are on an aircraft? Aircraft carrier. Just guess. I'll start looking. 3,000.
Sitting ducks.
Hong Luan 250. Not that too small. Oh! One of you guys. I don't know if you guys are former military or not, but yeah, about 5,000, give or take. 5,000. So you think about it this way, guys. And the problem now with our aircraft carriers, what happened with them? Did you notice something with this aircraft carrier? This is the Carl Vinson. Carl Vinson, when he moved, it has less escort that goes with it. Before you will have the aircraft carrier with the escorts going. We don't have that anymore. First of all, because we have an issue of recruitment. A lot of young people here do not want to go in the military, and rightly so. It's because they're saying, "Well, what am I joining the military for?" Gone the era. At least when I was there, was a little bit different. And before that, on the older generations, they were in the military.
No, we're waiting.
Now the military in the U.S. is forget about it, because some of them will be asking question, why do I join the military for? Those countries didn't come to invade me here. They didn't attack me. Why should I do it? But if even we are to go with this scenario, so here you have an aircraft carrier with about 5,000 to 6,000 personnel, with less escort, which means what? if the aircraft is targeted, which it will be targeted, because Iran has some capabilities, naval capabilities that I am aware of, that will be able to cause major damage. I will even go as far as saying, I won't be surprised that the Russians might provide the Iranians with some, because everything's going to be underwater, you sink in that aircraft carrier. So, and that's why I'm saying it's a major undertaking. It's because for us, and when I say us, I'm referring to the government. We never wanted to admit our mistakes because we are the highly mighty. So what do we end up doing? We double down. I've been through some experiences before. It's like my first time in Afghanistan back then. My first argument was, this is not a winnable war. Wouldn't it make more sense if we can decide either negotiate with the Taliban, leave their country, let them live whatever they want? Oh, Mr. David, that's a human rights issue, whatever. I say, come on. We have issues in our own home. Why are we going over there? Why are we putting the soldiers in the harm's way? For no reason. So, because you're going to have to consider the cost into all this. Remember, Afghanistan and Iraq. What have we gained from it? Nothing. Well, guess what? Guess what? Guess what, guys? A war with Iran will be nothing like you've ever seen in comparison to what we had in Afghanistan or what we had in Iraq. So, and I am not even talking yet about the cost, and I am on both the treasure and blood. Because if you know about how much the war in Afghanistan cost, if you know how much the cost of the invasion in Iraq cost, regarding dealing with Iran, you will be crossing to about $12 trillion. That's what you're looking at. And like the same arguments I made prior to the invasion of Iraq, I said, do not do it, because if we go in, we are not coming back out in 5 or 6 years. We're going to stay in for 15, 20 years. And my argument was dismissed. Oh, it will be a cakewalk. We're going to just go, liberate Baghdad, and get out. I say, you go in, you are staying in for 15 to 20 years. And here we are. That's exactly what happened. As a matter of fact, some of us still, some of the U.S. presence still in Iraq. This is part of where that problem. So then you start to, and it's going to be a long war with Iran. It ain't going to be over in 1 year or 2 or 3. You'll be looking at over a decade. And this is what I say. You have to think in terms of, when you try to analyze this kind of situations, you have to look at the whole big picture. And if we are to go with these threats, or we carry out these threats of attacking Iran, where are we going to launch the ground forces from? Because you're going to have some ground troops. You can't do this just from the air. Where are they going to be launched from? Well, you're going to bring them from the US? Forget about it. So you have the bases, you have the presence of US troops in the Middle East or West Asia. That's what I'm saying. Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, they're all going to have to become target. Even Turkey to a degree. So, and this is why you have to understand the history. And a lot of people are not, some of us are poor readers of history. We don't want to learn. Because if you are to think about where the operation is going to be launched from. So I will tell you this, guys. Use history as your guide. So use history as your guide, and especially when it comes down to the role the Russians is going to play into this. Because if you go back into the history of, for example, the Soviet Union, what was the most important things for the Soviet Union at that time is to have access to warm waters, especially in West Asia, and especially near Iran. When you look at 2 locations, Chabahar Port, and Bandar Abbas. 2 key locations. Look at look at the map for where the Chabahar Port is and Bandar Abbas. Those are very, very, very crucial. Because warm water, that is one of the reasons why Russia right now, they will go to a major whatever to protect the Black Sea. And like I always say, Iran is not Iraq, is not Syria. So here is what I wrote in my book, because I promised you I will share an excerpt with you from my book that I wrote about Iran. And I conducted a deep research into this. It took me a while, but here is what I wrote. In either case, containment or living with the nuclear Iran, Tehran's behavior will be closely watched. But for how long? After all, there are those who argue that whatever Iran's behavior may be, it is merely a reflection and function of its past experiences. But how can they say that when Iran never had the nuclear weapons before? Iran is not losing sleep over what the US policy might be when the former acquires nuclear weapons. I am convinced that Iranian political elite are conversing among themselves, saying, if we manage to endure the hardship of sanctions for over 30 years, what makes the Americans and their allies think they will enforce their policy, this policy or that policy on us as we join the nuclear club? That was my arguments back then. And here we are. So, and when we think about, to those who say, well, now Iran lost some, no. Iran didn't lose any influence in the region, despite what happened in Syria, despite what's happening in Lebanon. And by the way, in Lebanon, the media is not disclosing to you how many dead Israeli soldiers. They are not disclosing that truth. So, and to my knowledge, it's between 3,000 and 4,000. It's not even being disclosed. So, and that's what you need to understand, what's going on. And this is why you are seeing a lot of Israelis now are leaving Israel. Once again, to my knowledge, it is about between 900 to 1 million people have already left. So this is the big picture I need you guys to truly grasp and understand. So here's the thing. I had an opportunity to read in a foreign language an article by Karam Aziz, and very interesting insights, and I'm going to react to some of those and add something on my own. So the one thing that I concur with the author is that should Iran launch or target Diego Garcia if attacked, one thing that Iran is not going to differentiate between is that it's not going to differentiate between Britain or the US personnel or military assets, and rightly so, because UK, I tell you, is a mess. It's just following what the US, to the point, this is how to show you how weak Britain is, and it's done for anyone. The UK couldn't take any action against the US regarding the tariffs. That's how scared they are of the Americans. So despite what you hear. So the Iranians are saying there will be no distinction. And this was issued by an official inside the Iranian government without disclosing the name because it was anonymous. So those guys, they don't talk loud, and so what they're saying is, there will be no distinction in targeting British, and I'm quoting, a distinction between British or American forces if Iran is attacked from any base in the region or within the range of Iran's missiles. End of quote. And this particular individual added, which I found very interesting. Pay attention to this quote here. He said, and I quote, "When the time comes, it won't matter whether you are an American, a British, or Turkish soldier, you will be targeted if your base is used by Americans. End of quote. And that leads me to my original statement that Iran is not bluffing on this, because their survival. This is about their survival. And that is why Diego Garcia, for how strategic that is. And like I said, Diego Garcia has been a launch pad for the American bombers and also for the surveillance since 1970. That's how far back it goes. So all the Five Eyes, you all know the Five Eyes countries. So even though the Pine Gap is in Australia, Diego Garcia plays a role into all this. And that's why I'm saying for Iran to issue this, it must have something. And that something is it intends to use its ballistic missile and a long-range drones. And those are within of a range of 4,000 kilometers. I'm going to share a link with you guys in the chat box, should you want to read up more to inform yourself about literally what they have. So now we think about us deploying bombers. I want to say thank you to FU. Thank you so much for your super sticker. Truly appreciate you. Actually, there are some of you there. I'm gonna do this one. Just let me continue, guys, here quickly, and I'll give my thanks to everybody here for those who posted super stickers, and thank you in advance. So here's the thing: when you think about the B-52 right here, let me share a picture with you. Yeah, the B-2 Spirits. I'm sorry, the deployments, which is nothing but a posturing, no more no less, you know. And that's why I always say now, and I might do a live for you about what China might be thinking of right now and what kind of plan it will have in place. So even though the B-2 Spirit bombers, you know, which those, by the way, they have the capability of deep penetration strikes, you know, and they are now being deployed to Diego Garcia. It's within range. And Iran's not going to hesitate. So, because it's survival, like I mentioned earlier, it's about survival. And if you know anything about the history of Iran, the history of the Persian Gulf, the Persian Empire, I'm sorry, the history of how Persians are, they are very, it's not secluded. It just, they just like to live within their own space. They don't, you know, you go to Iran. I know some people, Americans, who went to Iran. Nobody bothered them. Nobody, just you go, you travel, you visit, tourism. This person that I know, one over there, it was a professor. So it was for academic. And I know because he is a professor of world relations. And one of his major academic background is the study of Zoroastrian, which Zoroastrian is in Iran. So, and this is why, if you think about this development, these statements by Iran, now the inclusion of this Diego Garcia in these statements, in my opinion, literally raises the stakes now even higher. And that's just how I see it. It's because if we think that we have Diego Garcia that is remote, far from any targeting elements, we're mistaken, because the Anglo-American, meaning the British and the American assets, will be within range. So that's how I see it. That is how I see it. So for Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi, when he announced that, you know, we don't respond to the American sort of letter about the negotiations and the threats and so forth. No, we're not going to do that. And we're not willing to negotiate directly with the Americans. And this is what Donald Trump is saying. Well, you either negotiate with us or we will target you militarily. Well, Iran is saying, bring it on. So, and when Donald Trump, you know how he is. He doesn't have finesse in understanding how to use diplomacy. So when he writes for him, somebody wrote for him anyway, and I quote here, I wrote them a letter. This is what Donald Trump's saying. I wrote them a letter saying, I hope you negotiate because it will be a terrible thing for us to go in militarily. End of quote. What makes you, Trump, this arrogant thinking?
Because you're going in. Revolutionary salute to our Queen Yaya's kids for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. Salute to you.
That you're going to just walk your way in, you know. And this, by the way, was done through the advisor of United Arab Emirates president, which United Arab Emirates, this is as hypocrites as they can get. Most of the Arab and Muslim countries, you all know where they are as far as where they stand on the spectrum of truth. There is no truth about them. Look at all of them right now, still watching what's going on in Gaza. None of them has the gut to even condemn what has been done unjustly. This is why I need you to, and I'm wrapping this up, guys. This is why I need you to understand the big picture of all this, is that all these hypes, the attack of Iran and all this is about serving Israel. That's what you need to understand. So, and the bottom line is, we will lose a war against Iran if we get involved. That means the only way is if we do it through proxies. Well, Iran made it clear. If an attack on us is launched from your country, you are a target. Simple as that. And this is what happened when you start developing your own in-house missile technology. You know, I'm wondering why, if Iran declared, I'm not going to say if it has a bomb, only this, if Iran declared that it in a possession of nuclear weapons, do you think we will have all these hypes? Most likely not the case. Think about North Korea. Dare the US to even consider even threatening North Korean weapons? We can't, because we know. And because they're saying,
I want that Kim Jong.
You mess with us, we will let you have it. And all their, by the way, their missiles are within range to every location in Asia where it hosts military presence. And this is why my big concern is how Philippines is going to be now used for the upcoming proxy war, tensions, conflict, whatever term you want to use. And I am very concerned. I'm very concerned. So I'm going to keep you updated on
Trump thinks that he can get away with this. Again, maybe the Israelis have been telling him, and I'm sure they have been, that we just completely gutted the air defense of Iran. You know, they're naked. You can just go fly over and drop your 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs. And that's apparently what they prepared. These bombs are so huge that they really could destroy some of these facilities that are deep underground, or potentially could. So he might be thinking that this is something that he can pull off, and we'll see. Again, the stories about the obliteration of Iran's air defense, I just don't believe. I can't know for sure, but I'm very skeptical of that. I think that they have actually, good air defense, and it's only going to get better with Russian support. And again, it's just that
This is something completely different from Lebanon or Gaza, where the Israelis just rule the sky and they can drop their bombs and fire their missiles at will. They can't do that in Iran, and it's going to be a completely different. It's going to be just a completely different situation for the Americans and the Israelis, because there'd probably be a joint operation if they really do try to fly into Iranian airspace and attack Iranian facilities. We may see planes go down, and then what happens? Can Trump just accept that, or is he going to double down? It's a very dangerous situation. Now, just maybe, Iran will make some kind of face-saving gesture, because again, they don't want this war. But at the same time, they have been, they do have their national pride and the concerns about their own sovereignty, and they have been burned again and again in the past. So far, the position of the Iranian government is that we're not dealing with you. Maybe they'll change, maybe they'll do a little something, just because maybe Trump just wants to have something to show, look what I did. He's not going to get a real agreement out of them, but maybe he can get a little something else, which is the Iranians are willing to concede just to avoid a war. But they may not be willing to do it. They may just decide, look, we're just going to have to bite the bullet this time. If we're constantly under, these threats, maybe we just have to meet them head on this time. And that's a very, very dangerous situation that we're looking at.
Do you think that Trump, people like Pete Hegseth, really believe that Iran is naked, that in this one attack from Israel, that Israel completely wiped out all their air defenses and they're completely open and naked? Because we saw after this attack, we saw footage from Iran of their air defense systems shooting everything down. It looked like fireworks in the sky. You can find it, I'm sure, on X. Mm-hmm. And you can see that I haven't seen a single impact. I haven't seen footage of a single impact from that so-called devastating attack from Israel. From my understanding, they didn't even penetrate Iranian airspace because they were getting locked on by the air defense systems. They want like 50 kilometers of the border fired and turned tail. And where's the evidence that their air defenses have been wiped out? How can they be so confident? Do they think they actually believe that Iran is so naked?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen the evidence. And normally, again, if the Israelis achieve something notable, they're not shy about producing the evidence. They release satellite photos, for example, and we just haven't seen them. So I'm highly skeptical. I don't think they did anything. They may be damaged a radar facility or something like that. Now, sometimes it's just like but I'm sure at the same time the Israelis are working on the Americans to try to convince them, maybe even supplying them with fabricated evidence. They're certainly not above doing that. And if you have, if your target audience, which is to say the U.S. defense establishment led by Pete Hegseth has a predisposition, to go to war and to believe the Israelis, maybe they can be fooled, or it's maybe the administration wants to be fooled on this because they really are eager to launch this war. And then there's something else going on. I think, like the victories, we have to call them victories against both Syria and Lebanon. The very devastating decapitation strikes on Lebanon, perhaps has produced a certain amount of hubris on the Israeli and American side. It's like, yeah, we can just wipe them out. We did this. Of course, Iran is not comparable to Lebanon. Again, as we say, Iran actually has control over their own airspace in a way that Lebanon doesn't. And then Iran is, though there are fracture points, there are guerrilla groups, and obviously the Israelis have succeeded in penetrating. Iranian society to some extent. It's nothing like Lebanon, where there's a huge Western intelligence and Israeli intelligence presence. So I just don't think you can make the comparison. But there may be had given them a false sense of invincibility, given Israel and the U.S. a false sense of invincibility, and then there was this sudden collapse in Syria, and maybe they're thinking, well, look, like people said that this could never happen. It did, so we can just. Why can't we do this in Iran too? A decapitation strike and the whole country will fall apart. It's just maybe they believe their own propaganda, that it's just that people are all waiting to rise up and the instant that the leadership is taken out, there's just the whole society will fall apart, or we'll see something like a repeat of Syria. But again, well,
is that thunder?
That's thunder. Yes, not artillery. Okay. It's thunder. There's there are okay. Well, Iran again is not comparable to Syria. It's one thing I probably should have paid more attention to this, but the Syrian economy was almost completely destroyed. It's just a fraction of what it used to be prior to the start of the Civil War in 2011. And again, the Americans seized the wheat fields, seized the oil producing region of Syria, and it imposed these very severe sanctions. And it was, the Syrian economy was something like 25% of what it was before. Now, Iran, they suffered because of these sanctions, but they still control all of their own territory. They're a much larger country, and they are now enjoying, growing trade relations with many countries in the world, important countries like Russia and China and India and so on and so forth. And so it's just not comparable. But it just may be that these people are going into it. That's one of the dangers. It's just like if you enjoy a string of successes, a leader can just have a sense of his own invincibility. And he can remember, these guys told me that, hey, you shouldn't do this. This is dangerous or whatever. And I did it, and I was proved to be right. So they stop listening sometimes to the, as they see it, the naggers, or the, I think there is a real danger that the U.S. might go ahead and do this with Israel. I think there is a real danger of it. It's more than just something on the order of 50% anyway. I'm really worried about this.
Yeah, me too. Just the language that Trump is using, saying, there will be a bombing and it'll be bombing the likes which they have never seen before. You wouldn't use that rhetoric if you were aware of Iran's capabilities. I think we've completely underestimated Iran, which I find extraordinary after they have made multiple demonstrations of their capabilities. Talked about the Soleimani attack. We've seen what they did in Tel Aviv, in Israel, on two attacks that they carried out. We know that they have hypersonic missiles. We know that they are in a defense contract with Russia. We know that they can punch back. But if you know that, why would you say something like this?
Yeah.
We would never say something like this to the Russians,
right?
At least I don't think so.
Well, the truth is, again, that there's been talk about striking Iran for better than 20 years. And we have always, and sometimes it seems like we get close to doing it. There's a real effort, within the different administrations, or serious consideration is given to the attack. So we've gotten close to this in the past. And the most recent, of course, was actually under Biden. Apparently, the Biden administration was very carefully considering an attack on Iran, a joint Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities, and then they decided against it. Now, I think they decided against it, and the reason that we've always pulled back is there is an understanding. There are realists, and honest analysts that within the intelligence agencies and within the Pentagon, and they have always won out in the past. So it's just like so clearly George W. Bush wanted to. I think Anthony Blinken wanted to, but in the end, they lost the argument because the other side or the realists could say, look, if you go down this road, there's a very, very high chance that we're going to have these catastrophic, consequences. It's not going to be a good look. It's going to be a real mess. So let's not do this. Now, I'm sure that those same people are saying the same thing, to Trump's people. But for the reasons that I just laid out, there's a chance that Trump's people are ignoring them.
That's scary. You've told me that Iran has been preparing for a war with America for decades. This is something that they've been getting ready for. Can you tell me how ready Iran is for a war with the United States?
Yeah, well, I don't know the details. We've seen actually video footage released by Iran of tunnels, very large tunnels underground, that are part of these underground missile facilities. And
not facilities.
So they do have,
not facilities, because if you think a facility, it's a building, might be a big building. No. Iran, they showed that too, but they showed missile cities. I think of a city with missiles everywhere, ready to fire off. That's what underground. That's what they've been showing.
All kinds of installations underground. And again, Iran is a large country, and much of it is very mountainous. So there are some of these facilities are deep within mountains, and they've had time to carve out these underground facilities. And they have studied the U.S. and have made strategic choices about how they're going to defend themselves and respond. They know that they don't have an air force or will ever have an air force that can really, counter the U.S., but they have worked on the new technologies, which we found to be, drone technology and missile technology, hypersonic missiles, that kind of thing. And we don't know how many of these missiles they have, but there's no question that they have a considerable number, and they've demonstrated that these are very precise. Again, the U.S. has a lot of assets in the region that would be very vulnerable to missile attacks and drone attacks. So, yeah, they can, they have significant air defense. I'm sure there are holes in it. It's a very large country. It's probably not as good as the Russian air defense. The Russian air defense is supposed to be the best in the world. And, even though it's the best in the world, occasionally something gets through because it's a huge country, and no air defense, no matter how good it is 100%. So I think inevitably some things would get through and do some real damage to Iran, but it wouldn't be on the scale that, would cause them to surrender or anything close to that. And they would be able to retaliate in a, very significant, potentially devastating fashion.
Is the United States, is our ability to inflict damage on Iran primarily through our Air Force? Is that what it would be?
Yeah, I think it would mainly be air-launched and ship-launched missiles.
Cowards.
Okay, let's say we have planes, and we have these stealth bombers. They're flying over Iran to bomb Tehran or bomb some nuclear facility deep in the mountains. What is the likelihood of these planes being shot down?
Well, I think there's a significant likelihood. The stealth technology has been shown to be, far less than perfect. These planes are not invisible. They have.
Well, I've already reported on here. Putin. See, if you listen to Putin, he'll tell you about their lies and expose them. In Syria, when they first invaded Syria, and Trump was threatening to bomb and attack and devastate the Syrian capital and help the terrorists, and then Putin came out and warned them, it said there was no such thing as an invisible plane, letting them know that the S-400 system was over there. Do not think you're going to bomb the Capitol when he was over there in the military campaign, but he just was exposing me, let them know there's no such thing as an invisible plane. The U.S. stealth bomber technology is a finesse of their civilians to steal our money, and they can bomb poor countries who don't have advanced radar systems, but Russia already warned them, and they didn't send those radar systems over there to Iran. They're going to be able to track those so-called stealth bombers.
Have a reduced profile on radars.
These Reaper, MQ Reaper drones that the Houthi rebels have been shooting down over Yemen, those are advanced stealth drones too. You're not even supposed to see them. How is the Houthi rebels seeing these stealth drones? They're stealth. You're not supposed to see them. Come on, stop it.
Their system, but they can be detected. So I think it's quite likely that the let's say stealth bombers would be identified, detected as they cross into Iranian airspace or approach it. I mean, that's the story that we heard actually, that during the most recent attack by the Israelis, is that their planes were approaching Iran, and that
and Putin said that they would turn all those planes into flying caskets. That's what he said.
But then, maybe this is just a false report of nothing more than a rumor, but this comes from Alistair Crook, who has some, very good sources in the Middle East, including in Israel. And he was told that, as these planes approached Iran, they became aware that the Iranians had detected them. They had locked onto them. And, rather than risk being shot down, they turned around, before crossing into Iranian airspace.
So then what they do is they go back and lie to the United States, saying, we got rid of all of their air defense systems. Now you guys go and do it. We already took care of it, and we'll be the ones that get shot down. It's crazy. I mean, also, I
suspect that's what's going on. I can't know for sure, but I suspect that's what's going on.
Right. I mean, but we saw that footage of Iran's air defenses prior, and they knocked everything down. And I imagine shooting down a cruise missile or a ballistic missile is much more difficult than shooting down a plane, which is slower moving and much larger. So the idea that they won't be able to shoot down these planes, I think, is ludicrous. That we could just fly over and bomb them with impunity is insane. I wouldn't be surprised if Iran shoots down all of these. And then on top of that, where are these planes being launched from? Oh, from USS Harry Truman or Diego Garcia? Well, Iran can just hit your aircraft carrier and hit that Diego Garcia base. And where are these planes going to even come back to if they even did make it to their target? It's like, I just feel like if I'm able to think about this, surely somebody in the Trump administration could think about this too. You have all these assets scattered throughout the Middle East that have.
When I heard Iran threaten Turkey, that's when I knew they wasn't playing. When they said Turkish soldiers too, I knew they wasn't playing. Letting Turkey know, don't be a fool and let the U.S. use your territory to play with us, because without nuclear weapons, they'll kick Turkey ass too. So don't play games, Turkey, you're not willing to get drawn into. I knew they weren't playing. They just not going to say that the Turkish president ain't no sucker, but he's not a fool.
Have very poor air defense or, incapable air defense of stopping what the Iranians have. So it's just, we do this, all hell's going to break loose. We're just going to get humiliated throughout the Middle East. We will be blown out of the Middle East if we do this. Do you think so? I know you say it could be. I don't even think that we can do that much, because it's just like you said. Okay, Navy and air, and Iran's ready for this. This isn't Gaza. This isn't Lebanon. This isn't Syria. This is something completely different.
I want to, first of all, just confirm what you said about the aircraft. Aircraft are much more vulnerable. That's a change. A couple decades ago, the aircraft had the edge. There were anti-air missiles. Of course, they've been around for many decades. But let's say an F-16 or whatever, a top-notch fighter jet could could evade these. It would be scary. It would rely on some real skill on the part of the pilot, but they could evade them. And that's just not true anymore. That's what I've heard. It's just like you really can't evade these. You can take every evasive, maneuver in the book, but it's going to hit you, and bring your aircraft down. And we can see that actually in the Ukraine war.
That's a fact.
Because the Russians have.
That's a fact. I was just going to say that Ukraine had Russia's S-300 systems. Russia had to be very careful with those air defense systems, so they was going to get their planes shot down. They had to strategically, meticulously, and they lost some planes and some pilots and some helicopters bombing those S-300 systems and having to use advanced missiles to bomb them that the U.S. doesn't have, the hypersonic. But anyway, those S-300 systems that Iran has from Russia, they are not a joke. They absolutely can shoot any of those planes down.
Have a very formidable air force, but they rarely fly over Ukrainian-held territory. They, they used to be that they stayed well back. Now they're getting closer just because Ukrainian air defenses have been so degraded, so they can get closer to the front line. But they still don't, I think with very rare exceptions, they don't fly over Ukrainian-held territories. They still have air defense. And, it's not what it was before, but it only takes one missile to bring down one of these planes. And, it's very revealing. I mean, that's just the nature of warfare these days. So, you're living in the past, right? You could, during the Persian Gulf War, the first Iraq War, we could fly over these territories and just unleash, huge numbers of bombs and devastate these countries before we moved in on the ground. And, that's the old war. That's not the new war that we're in, the new warfare that exists at the present time.
Right. I mean, just you saying that Russia still does not fly over Ukrainian territory with their aircraft is very illuminating. Russia has been pummeling Ukraine for 3 years, targeting their air defense systems. And we see it. We see videos of Patriot systems getting blown up to pieces. And despite 3 years of systematically targeting and destroying, Ukrainian air defenses and defense capabilities, they still haven't destroyed all of it. So the idea that in one magical attack that Israel pulled off, where there's no evidence of any strikes, that we did it in one go, despite Russia using hypersonic missiles that cannot be shot down to take these things, using zircons and whatever they have, and it's a process. We see that it's a grind. You can't just flip a switch and then it's over. So the idea that Iran is naked is so absurd, in my opinion. But I see it touted again and again. When I go on X, I see people say, they're going to find out they don't have any air defense left. I see it stated by so many people. And it's insane to think that if you just, think about the things we've said,
right. Yeah, no, you're right. It's been 3 years of devastating missile strikes on Ukraine. And their air defense has been seriously degraded. Their energy infrastructure has been seriously degraded. It's just a fraction of what it used to be. But it took 3 years. And Ukraine is roughly the size and population of Iran.
Not population. Iran's like twice the population.
Okay, right. I was just going to say, exactly. So, and in fact, it's often we hear, and this is actually another mistake that Witkoff said, that Ukraine has a population of 40 million. That was never correct. Because first of all, the Donbass and whatever is not, you can't take those people and put them in on the Ukrainian side. They're clearly on the Russian side. They're actually somewhere down to like 20 million now because of the territory they've lost, but also because of all the people that have fled. So we're talking about 20 million people. That's one reason why, this is kind of an aside, but just why, in spite of all the damage done to the energy infrastructure, it's still more or less functioning in a lot of places. The lights are on most hours of the day. So many people have left. They don't have the same demand, that they had before. And they had also redundant systems before, but that's something else. Yeah, so we're talking about 20 million versus what, 80 million, something like that for Ukraine. And again, this is a place that's prepared for a long time for it. You're going to do it in 1 or 2 strikes? No way. Yeah, again, 3 years of just constant pounding by the Russians. And yeah, we've seen real damage, but they're still standing. So yeah, so the whole thing is just kind of completely fanciful.
It's insanity. And also Russia is just, right there on the border of Ukraine. This is existential for them. Do you think that we're going to be able to build up a huge presence and base right there next to Iran to have continued operations?
Yeah, well, of course we do have some bases very close to them. Those are the Persian Gulf.
Obliterated.
Yeah, but that's right. But that cuts 2 ways. They're very close to Iran, and Iran, if they find themselves in an existential struggle, they'll take out those bases. They're they're within range of virtually all their missiles. That's a really short trip across the Gulf there.
But despite everything we've said, you think that this might actually happen. And if this happens, America is going to suffer such a humiliating defeat. Is it possible that in any way that the US could be successful in this endeavor? I just don't.
Well, nothing's impossible. Maybe, okay, let's just say they have a successful decapitation strike. Some of these missiles, or even, a bomber gets through and just takes out a good portion of the Iranian leadership. And maybe, Iranian society is more fragile than we assumed. I think that's all very unlikely. I'm sure that the Iranians are preparing for this. And Iran is held together for a long time under, much greater stresses, like the Iran-Iraq war. That was, that led to the death of from anywhere from 200,000 to 500,000 Iranians, and a lot of it through chemical weapons, and Iran held together, and they've held together, under years and years of sanctions. And Iran is now, in a lot of ways, is starting to turn the corner. They're coming in from the cold. They're developing these new relationships, and so I think it's really a pipe dream. You can never say anything's impossible, but it's virtually impossible that it's going to be successful.
And I just can't believe we're even considering it. And do you think it's likely? Trump saying this, I feel like he has to back it up, right? Like he said, he doesn't want to appear to be weak.
Yeah.
Do you think he would? Do you really think that this might happen? Do you think
a
like a 50-50 chance?
I just, for all the reasons I've given, and again, we've come close to the abyss before and pulled back, and so that may happen again. Trump has made threats that he hasn't carried through on. Yet on the other hand, we're talking about Gaza. Like he said, all hell, they'll be hell to pay if they don't turn over all the hostages, by Saturday. And of course that didn't happen, and there wasn't hell to pay. But hey, we're just looking a couple months later, hell has, that there is hell to pay. So yeah, I don't know. I have no confidence in it not happening. Let's just put it that way. I'm not. It is. We're really on a knife's edge here.
We have this coming down, and a potential large Russian offensive maybe happening around the same time, in 1 to 2 months from now. It's
right. Well, well, that's another thing too. Is that you have to look at the kind of the interplay between Russia, the Ukraine war, and Iran, because Russia and Iran are close allies, and obviously in a full-scale attack on Iran is going to really put the Russian-American relationship under a lot of strain. We have seen some improvement, but that's going to be put at risk if this happens. And just on the Russian side, most certainly, you're attacking our close friend here, our partner, and we're going to support them, and that may end up angering Trump, especially if his attack fails. and maybe it will fail catastrophically, and he'll be tempted to blame the Russians for it. It becomes it's we're looking at a minefield in front of us. There are a lot of things that could go very, very wrong. You can hope, and I that again at the last second that Trump's better nature and the realists will win out and will pull back from the edge, and it won't happen. I mean, that's certainly possible, but again, I just wouldn't put a whole lot of money on that.
On the significance of what President Putin has been saying lately, both to a group of businessmen and to sailors aboard a submarine. But before we do, a couple of other questions, if you don't mind, on the topics that are making the rounds this morning. Do you think that the European elites are preparing for war with Russia?
I think they're doing the military industrial complex's bidding and trying to get their economies back in shape. And the way they do that is traditionally prepare for war. Problem is that once they get all those tanks built, they're going to have to use them, or they'll replace them, and so it's kind of a ruse they're using to stay in power. They're on very slippery ground. Their social benefits are going way down. They're all going to be thrown out pretty soon. They're just trying to delay the day when that comes.
So Alistair Crook and I were speaking this morning about the difference between building a tank and building a car. You build a tank. If you don't use it, you gain nothing by it. If you do use it, you're destroying somebody else's property. You build a car and it can be used to generate wealth. It can get somebody to work. It can be used to deliver products and services and goods. This is economics 101. This is not any advanced theory.
Sure it is.
Don't van der Leyen and Starmer and Macron understand this?
They're way out on a limb, Judge, and they think that they can use Zelensky to kind of save them. In other words, they want to appear the saviors of Ukraine. Putin is in position not to let that happen. And as soon as Trump learns a little better, and I understand Trump ended up yesterday by saying, yeah, we're going to talk again, Putin and I. As long as he understands a little better what's going on in Ukraine and in Europe, to a lesser extent in Europe, because they're pretty much strap hangers. So they're pretty much sidelined. And although they are building up their own economies and trying to save their economies by going on a war footing, it's not going to come to a very good end, that's for sure. And I think they'll be sensible enough not to tweet the Russian bear to the point where they go to war with Russia. I can't believe that that's more than just rhetoric.
As of last night, the so-called president of peace had bombed a defenseless country 10,000 miles away 65 times in 48 hours.
I appreciate the love, family.
To what end? Pepe Escobar's lucky he got out of there alive.
Well, because Netanyahu wants them to do it. I mean, it's really, really simple. Trump is doing his bidding. He's trying to bail Netanyahu out when Netanyahu is in very, very, very strange and difficult circumstances. That's the only reason. And the Houthis are an example of defiance, and actually a very bizarre example of people who consider principle paramount. In other words, they don't want the Palestinians to be genocided, and they are being genocided. And the Houthis feel a certain affinity and solidarity with them, which to my amazement, the major Arab countries do not feel or are so bribed by the United States in economic terms that they can't do what they should do in supporting, as the Houthis and Ansar Allah is doing. In other words, they're not supporting them the way they should.
What is your take, big picture, before we get into some of the specifics of what he said, of President Putin's speeches in the past week? One to a group of businessmen and one to a group of sailors aboard a submarine. We'll start with the latter. Putin addresses his troops.
Yeah, this is a big deal, Judge. What he talked about was a whole slew of things. Let me go through just some of the major points. There he is with the Supreme Commander of the Navy. He says, look, things are going really good in Ukraine. I'll tell you briefly, we're doing it gradually, not as quickly as some would like. Oh, isn't that interesting? In other words, Putin is admitting there are lots of people in Russia itself which would, come on, get on with this thing. You could do it. Why don't you go faster? Now, what else? Okay. He said, we agreed in Istanbul, 6 weeks after the war started, on denazification. He puts that before demilitarization, and that's significant. The head of the negotiation from Ukraine initial disagreement, and it included denazification. Okay. Now, I mentioned yesterday, or I guess it was Friday when we were doing the roundtable, that with respect to relations with the United States, Putin was very upfront, saying, quote, I would like to say first that, in my opinion, the newly elected president of the United States sincerely wants to end this conflict for a number of reasons, such I won't go into right now. There are many of them. But in my opinion, this is a sincere desire. Now, that puts Putin way out on a limb, okay? I trust, they're talking about trust now after what they regard with some reason as a series of betrayals. So either he's feeling that he's got this whole thing under control, or he's just bragging, and there are people within Russia who would second guess that and say, look, it may be your opinion, Vladimir Vladimirovich, but it's not our opinion. You need more than trust. You have to have the goods. And that's when Putin goes into the major thing about whether he has a legitimate, whether Zelensky has a legitimate government. And of course, this is not the first time that Putin said, no, it's not legitimate. And neither are all the people that he's appointed. They're all illegitimate. Worse still, the Nazis are back in power. He makes that very clear. He points out, look, in 2017, the U.S. Congress said the Azov Battalion, a bunch of Nazis, and you couldn't give any aid to them. 2017. Oh, that was my term, Trump's reign, right? So he says, look, the Nazis are the problem, and you got to address denazification in a very severe way. And that means that you can't negotiate with a figurehead who is run by the Nazis. That's what he says. Okay, so what do you do? I got an idea, he says. We'll go to the UN. We'll have the UN involved. And curiously enough, Wang Yi, Chinese foreign minister, is due in Moscow next week. I do believe they're going to put some substance behind this proposal, that the UN come in, as it has done in situations like Serbia and East Timor, and kind of sort of envelop this thing so there can be a ceasefire. And there can be real negotiations, not with the Nazis, but with the people that come in and are able to arrange real negotiation, real elections first, and then negotiations with people who are rightfully and juridically in power. That's a tall order. It takes a long time.
Here's President Trump critical of Putin, and then we'll listen to these actual words which you've just so nicely summarized. So, Chris, Cut number 9.
And I was disappointed in a certain way. Some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because when he considers Zelensky not credible, he's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that. But I think he's going to be good. And I certainly wouldn't want to put secondary tariffs on Russia, but if they were put on, it would not be very good for them.
I don't think President Putin could care less about tariffs or more sanctions. And I think President Trump is either pretending to be unaware or is truly unaware of how well Russia has prospered under the sanctions. But getting back to what President Putin said, here's the core of what he said. It's a very, very articulate explanation. Cut number 15.
The current civil authorities in Ukraine have no legitimacy in accordance with the country's constitution. Ukraine has held no presidential election, while according to the constitution, all key officials are to be appointed by the president, including regional government bodies, governors, and so on. So if the president is illegitimate, so are all the others. So under these circumstances of de facto illegitimacy, neo-Nazi formations receive additional weapons and recruit new personnel. What does this lead to? What could it lead to? It results in de facto power being in their hands. This in turn means that it is already unclear with whom to sign documents and what effect such documents might carry. For tomorrow, new leaders may come to power through elections and declare, "We do not know who signed those papers, so goodbye." The issue is not just this uncertainty. It is that these neo-Nazi formations, such as Azov, among others, are effectively beginning to run the country. This raises the question, how is it possible to conduct negotiations with them? In such situations, international practice follows a well-established path. Within the framework of the United Nations peacekeeping operations, there have been several cases of what is termed external governance or temporary administration. This occurred in East Timor, I believe in 1999, in parts of the former Yugoslavia, and in New Guinea. In short, such precedents exist.
Boy, I think he's got a terrific handle on what's going on there. That is a brilliant, in my view, and lucid explanation of the dangers of negotiating with Volodymyr Zelensky. Your thoughts, Ray?
I think when they talk, probably later this week, Putin will have a chance to school Trump on what's really happened here, and to persuade Trump, and the evidence is legion, that the Nazis are really in control. The Nazis, aided and abetted by MI6, the British intelligence service. One sidelight here is that to the degree Trump succeeds in declassifying all those Russiagate documents, it will show that the British were involved deeply in all this stuff from the very outset, and they tried to do Trump in before he became elected, and then cooperated in the effort of Russiagate. So the British and the Nazis are together here, and here is Putin trying to find a third way, okay? And as I say, I fully expect the Chinese Wang Yi, the foreign minister, very adept with Lavrov in Moscow next week, to be putting together a little package that they'll surface at the UN Security Council, a package that makes good sense, eminent good sense, and has some promise of circumventing this business about denazification.
Right.
You remember that from the very outset, Putin said, look, we have a twin aim in this special military operation. Demilitarization, that's about done. Denazification, that's worse. So that's why he's focusing on this. And with respect to moving toward the Dnieper or finishing off the job, I just can't omit this passage of what he told those sailors. What's happening today, it is very clear. Along the entire line of contact, our troops have a strategic initiative. I just recently said, we will finish them off, period. Okay. There are reasons to believe that we will finish them off. I only think that the Ukrainian people should realize what is happening what that means to them. So they are finishing them off. That's the background here. That's the context. They're in no rush, and they're saying, "Look, Mr. Trump, this is going to drag on for another year." Witness the fact that one of the Russian negotiators said that.
The emotional difference between them is remarkable. Putin and Trump. Putin is immensely patient, and Trump is immensely impatient. I mean, this is obvious to a school child, much less those of us.
Yeah, he's not getting his way, you know. And when one of the Russian negotiators in Saudi Arabia made a statement just 2 days ago, saying, this is going on for a year or more. I mean, this is really difficult, and these things are not intractable, but it's going to take a really long time. Kurasin is his name. Well, that pissed Trump off, to use his expression.
Right.
When he gets a little real, when hopefully real analysts show him that the reality here is that he's got no cards on the battlefield, and that to the degree he can recognize the problem with the Nazis, well, that's got to be addressed. And this is one imaginative. Now, Putin said, this is not the only way we could do this, but this is new. Let's consider it. So there's a new proposal on the table. I hope it gets some lift by people who really matter in the world.
Here's President Putin on Ukraine elections. Chris, cut number 14.
In principle, it would indeed be possible to discuss, under UN auspices, with the United States and even European countries, and certainly with our partners and allies, the possibility of establishing a temporary administration in Ukraine. To what end? To conduct democratic elections, to bring to power a competent government that enjoys public trust, and only then to begin negotiations on a peace treaty and sign legitimate agreements that would be recognized worldwide as consistent and reliable.
I don't get it. Trump is, quote, pissed off, to use his phrase, at President Putin's challenging the legitimacy of Vladimir Zelensky. Trump threw that, not physically, threw Vladimir Zelensky out of the White House because he had the temerity to challenge him and to challenge Vice President Vance. And now Trump comes to his defense. Putin, in my opinion, makes a perfectly valid moral and legal argument that it would be crazy to negotiate with this guy when he's going to be replaced by the hardliners because he's negotiating with us.
Well, again, the British and the Nazis are working hand in glove. The primary contender to take over for Zelensky happens to be Zelensky, okay? And what is he? He's Ukrainian ambassador in London. They're grooming him, but Putin is not going to have any part of that. So what we have here is a kind of a deal where Trump's got to realize that just because he four-putted the 18th green, for God's sake, he's not allowed to be pissed off at Putin. That's what it comes to. That was Sunday after the golf game with Lindsey Graham and the Finnish president urging Trump to do the kinds of things that Trump is trying to not do with respect to Putin. So the saving grace is Putin's in no hurry. He's saying, look, we can finish him off anytime we want, and that's true, okay? And so his negotiators say could take a year. And what does that require? That requires Trump to recognize the realities here and try to help do something about denazification, because that is worse than it was back in 2022. And there is a way to do that. UN is just one good proposal, in my view.
We started out this conversation by my asking you if the European elites are preparing for war with Russia, and we all know that they are. As our mutual friend Gerald Salenti says, when all else fails, they take you to war. President Putin is not ignorant of that, but he's willing to talk to the Europeans and said so in this clip. Chris, cut number 13.
We are prepared to work with Europe as well, despite their inconsistent behavior and constant attempts to lead us up the garden path. Nevertheless, we have grown accustomed to this. I trust we will avoid making mistakes rooted in excessive trust towards our so-called partners.
See, he making a point to NATO too by having everything mean something. He's having this meeting in a nuclear-powered submarine, letting all of them phonies know they're going to get a taste of this war. France, all of them, they keep on talking tough and daring to come challenge him in the battlefield.
But in general, they have a problem over there, which is never highlighted, just mentioned in passing. I am highlighting it. What is it? Ultra-nationalists have had considerable influence in Ukraine from the start, in fact, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. These people hold openly neo-Nazi views, and they even use the term in Ukraine, so we were not the ones who invented it. Curiously, few people mention this now either.
Few people mention this now.
I'm glad, Judge, that you chose that translation, because there's an erroneous translation which says Putin. I hope that we don't fall afoul of, I hope that we don't get conned again. That's pretty much what he says. But the word in Russian is nadeyus, and the word means really, I expect, or as this translator did, I trust that we're not going to get conned again, okay? That's big, okay? Because that's what he was accused of, rightfully so, for 8 years as he sat back and depended on the Germans and the French to monitor the Minsk Accords. That's not going to happen again. So he's saying, I trust this is not going to happen again. He's not saying, I hope this is not going to happen again, because the pressure is on him. And he doesn't really have to move very fast. All he has to do is a trit and a trit and a trit. And there's a major offensive coming in May, I think. The Russians will go all the way to the Dnieper, and then it'll be a new situation. And Trump might be encouraged to deal now rather than then.
Ray McGovern, a pleasure chatting with you, my dear man. Thank you for
A few hours ago, insiders in Kiev reported that Volodymyr Zelensky's mental state had sharply deteriorated once again. Reports indicate the head of the Kiev regime has been unable to sleep for 3 consecutive days. In addition, Volodymyr Zelensky also began to suffer from severe migraines and a lack of appetite. As it turned out, this political clown felt unwell immediately after the so-called Coalition of the Willing Summit, which took place in Paris on March 27. Emmanuel Macron organized this summit to strengthen European countries' support for Ukraine. However, unfortunately for Macron and Zelensky, this summit repeated its predecessor's fate and also failed. Despite the participation of leaders from 28 countries, including representatives from Australia, Canada, and Austria, the summit ended without an agreement on key issues. For instance, Poland has officially declared that Warsaw will never send its regular army to Ukraine, even as peacekeepers. It is noteworthy that the official Brussels fully supported Poland's statement. At this summit, EU representatives reiterated that European troops will only appear on the combat contact line if the United States commits to ensuring the security of European soldiers from a military standpoint. Moreover, even France disappointed Zelensky during this summit. In particular, Paris has officially declared that France will not be able to transfer frozen Russian assets to Kiev. The only thing the EU countries have given Ukraine is access to European ammunition depots, and the opportunity to receive enhanced intelligence from EU satellites. In addition, to somehow cheer up Zelensky, Emmanuel Macron, nevertheless, agreed to transfer €2 billion to Kiev, in the form of a defense package. Of course, amid the current realities on the battlefield, this European aid looks ridiculous, and even pathetic, especially against the backdrop of American aid that Kiev received during the Biden administration. It is noteworthy that Zelensky himself spoke extremely negatively about the results of the recent summit meeting. In particular, this dead man walking bluntly stated that Ukraine needs European soldiers not for their stand on the combat contact line as peacekeepers, but to fight against the Russian army. We don't need peacekeepers or deterrence forces. We need European troops to fight with us against the Russian army, Zelensky said. Thus, the head of the Kiev regime once again made it clear that as long as he is in power, this war will never end through peaceful negotiations. Against this backdrop, British journalists from the New Statesman magazine said that it is Volodymyr Zelensky who is the main obstacle to concluding the long-awaited peace between Moscow and Kiev. According to British journalists, Zelensky continues to refuse territorial concessions, even despite the Russian army's significant successes in all key directions of the front. And this fact is very annoying for the United States. The fact is that Washington is well aware that if the Kiev authorities continue to resist, Russia will not only take control of much more territory, but will also destroy Ukraine's statehood. Simply put, if the Kiev authorities continue to resist and refuse territorial concessions, the whole of Ukraine may eventually turn into a Western subject of the Russian Federation. Against this backdrop, reputable military correspondent and expert, Alexander Kotz, expressed confidence that Volodymyr Zelensky's days are numbered. According to him, at the moment, the Trump administration is seriously considering the option of physically eliminating the head of the Kiev regime. For the United States, Zelensky has become a real pain in the ass. To preserve the remnants of Ukraine under the influence of the United States and sign the long-awaited peace, Washington needs to put a more accommodating person in Zelensky's place as soon as possible, who will agree to make territorial concessions and end this bloody confrontation. As strange as it may sound, but Zelensky's actions and his desire to continue fighting to the last Ukrainian are very beneficial to Moscow. Given the fact that the Russian army has the initiative in all key directions of the front, Kiev's unwillingness to sign a peace treaty may lead not only to the liberation of the entire Donbass by the Russian army, but also to the creation of new regions, such as Novorossiya and Malorussia. By the way, a few days ago, speaking at a meeting of the board of the Prosecutor General's office, Vladimir Putin made a rather strange statement. In particular, the Russian president, commenting on the situation on the battlefield, for the first time began to talk not only about Donbass, but also Novorossiya. According to Putin, Moscow will do everything to ensure the rule of law in these territories. This statement by Putin caused a heated discussion in the expert community. Many Russian experts expressed confidence that, in addition to the complete liberation of the Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk regions, Vladimir Putin also plans to create a new state, Novorossiya. This state will include parts of the Dnipropetrovsk, Kirovohrad, Nikolaev, and Odessa regions. Furthermore, Russian experts also expressed confidence that by 2030, Novorossiya, along with South Ossetia and Abkhazia, will join the Union state of Russia and Belarus. Given the fact that the Russian army is advancing in all key directions of the front, such a scenario looks quite reasonable. The fact that Vladimir Putin is seriously considering reviving the Novorossiya project became clear on March 28, 2025. In particular, after launching the newest multipurpose nuclear submarine PERM of Project 885M Yazan M, Vladimir Putin officially stated that everything happening at the front indicates that most likely there will be no peace agreements, and that the Russian army will have to finish Ukraine off. Ukrainian Army Major Valery Prozapas also added oil to the fire. Answering journalists' questions, this Ukrainian officer bluntly stated that everything that is happening on the southern front indicates that the Russian army is preparing to seize the Nikolaev and Odessa regions. According to him, Putin's main goal is to create a land corridor that will connect Crimea and Pridnestrovye. Valery Prozapas, referring to intelligence data, expressed confidence that after the capture of Odessa, Vladimir Putin will join the Pridnestrovye to the Odessa region, which will become part of the future state, called Novorossiya. Against this backdrop, the Ukrainian officer called on the Kiev authorities to conclude a peace treaty with Russia as soon as possible, otherwise, such a state as Ukraine will cease to exist.
Tulsi Gabbard told a congressional hearing, quote, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not activated the nuclear weapons program. Then last night, President Trump threatened a massive bombing campaign against Iran if a nuclear deal isn't reached. He told NBC News in a phone interview, if they don't make a deal, there will be bombing, and it will be bombing the likes of which they have never seen before. We want to bring in Colonel Rob Maness now. He's the host of the Rob Maness Show. I mean, what is happening here, Colonel? Trump seemingly contradicting something his national intelligence director said more than a week ago. Seems like and she would have probably access to more intelligence than anyone. She's the one that provides his daily morning briefing every morning, right? With threat assessments. So what's going on here?
You make a good point, Clayton, but remember, these lower level bureaucrats, it is not past them to push lies up to appointed leaders, especially early in an administration like this. And I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying the reality is, and I have direct experience in this when I was a young officer on the Joint Staff, that Ms. Gabbard probably was briefed by her bureaucrats in the intelligence world that the Iranians are not building a nuclear bomb. And that set it up to where now the president is saying one thing and she's saying another, looking like there's a disagreement, when in reality, based on the experience that I have and what we saw from the North Koreans and their nuclear weapons development program, the Iranians probably do have some level of weapons capability at this point, maybe even 3 to 7 warheads, which we knew about North Korea long before it was ever admitted in public by any of the bureaucrats or appointed leaders. So that's the baseline of where I'm coming from there. And look, they've been lying to us on Ukraine the whole time. I was talking about how the American military was running that operation, just like you were all the way from the very beginning. And we were told, no. I mean, and they lie every single day. So that's where I'm coming from. Now, as far as the president goes and what he said, there's some good news in that activity. And here it is. The good news is that, look, the president is a known quantity to the Ayatollahs and the mullahs and the IRGC. He made a big statement when he took out General Soleimani without notice and sent them the right message about his future leadership. And now we're there. We're at that future leadership. So we've got B-2 bombers in numbers that have never been deployed before to a deployed location down in Diego Garcia, if the open source reporting is to be believed, and I have no reason to question it. We've never done that before. Is that more than just a message without muscle behind it? Absolutely, because of the previous actions of President Donald J. Trump. The good news about that is the Ayatollahs may be able to get out of this without us going to war against Iran, which I am totally opposed to. I've been opposed to that the entire time that this has been an issue from when Obama put the JCPOA in place and all of that. The neocons want us to go in there in a ground war, boots on the ground, just like Ukraine and Russia are going at it in Europe, and they want to do there too. And we should be adamantly opposed to that. There's no reason for it. That's number one. Number two, if he chooses to use kinetic force against the Iranians, it's going to likely be against their nuclear capability. So it will be limited in scope and limited in time. But really, has the United States Congress, and here's my big question, given us permission to do that beyond what we're doing by defending our U.S. Navy ships and defending commercial shipping traffic in the Red Sea against the Houthis and any Iranian forces associated with that? I've long been an advocate that we should be taking out their command and control and intelligence ships that help the Houthis do that type of thing. But that's not even close to what I would support going against Iran directly, because it's not really necessary. Look, in the first Trump administration, the maximum pressure campaign had them literally on their knees.
Lies.
Unfortunately, this president and this administration entered the situation where we are the ones that are weak, and they've got to get our strength built back up. And you have to meet the situation where it's meeting you. And right now, they've got to understand in the leadership halls of Iran that this man means business.
I mean, it's absolutely chilling. I see so many people in our chat are just saying, I am so sick of these wars. As says, no more wars. I mean, I think what so many Trump supporters voted for was, in many ways, George Washington's farewell address, which is American isolationism in a way. Like, stop these foreign wars. And now here President Trump is bombing Yemen, just launched an attack overnight in Somalia. Like, these are all the things that he criticized Obama for, and now we're back at doing it again. I guess at the heart of it, Colonel, is, you had the IAEA report as well. So forget the bureaucrats. If these low-level bureaucrats are lying to Tulsi Gabbard, and then she's getting in front of Congress and saying there's no evidence they're moving towards a nuclear weapon, they want to enrich uranium for their own nuclear power production, which is totally different. And apparently, according to the reports I've seen, that's where all evidence points to, is that they want to enrich uranium for their own nuclear power production, just like we're allowed to do. And I'm not speaking about how great these people are or not. I'm just talking about their own means of energy production in their own country, in their own sovereign country.
Got the right to
then you have the IAEA report just a few months ago confirming with their own eyeballs that they're not moving towards a nuclear weapon. So I'm just lost. Well, like, who's beating the drum of war here? Because it sounds like it's a fool's errand, and we will be killed. I mean, you have 50,000 Americans sitting there sitting ducks right now in the Middle East. Those will be targets, and they're not bases, as you know. These are like little dinky outposts and huts and stuff. You have some bases there, but many of these things are not well equipped to stop hypersonic missiles or anything.
That's true, but they don't have enough hypersonic missile capability to hit every single one of those little outposts. But even one American lost over this is too many. Right. When they killed the three Americans over at the Syria-Jordan border last year, that's too many Americans. They don't need to be there. We don't need to have Americans on the ground in the Middle East at all. Look, it's one thing to defend international shipping lanes, and if somebody shoots at our Navy vessels that are out in international waters, to be able to fire back, which is why I support the operation against the Houthis, because the Biden administration did not do it effectively, and it needs to be carried out effectively to stop that type of behavior. It's another totally other thing to go in and say, well, we need to go to war against Iran and put boots on the ground and do massive bombing campaigns that last for years and years and years. I don't support that. The American people don't support that. I don't believe Donald Trump will support that either. But again, we have to meet the situation where it is. And the situation is that we come into this, the Trump administration comes into this with America that is weak as it has ever been because of this Biden administration. And in order to get peace through strength back where we need it to be, where we're not involved in these endless wars anymore, we have to build up our strength. And while we're doing that, we have to face these criminals that are doing this kind of activity. And the Iranians are not innocent people here. And quite honestly, I don't trust the IAEA either. I've been around nuclear weapons since I was 17 years old, and I don't really believe anything that they say, nor any other international World Economic Forum's type organization at all. I don't believe anything that they say. The only thing that I would believe is if I could walk in and look at it with my own eyeballs, because I would know what I was looking at. So the indications have been for many, many years now that they are building up enough enriched uranium to develop nuclear weapons. And they're at a point now where they have had enough capability where North Korea was, in my own experience, when they were getting ready to break out with nuclear warheads. And they were a lot further ahead, actually had 8 of them, if I remember correctly, before we ever acknowledged, and it was a year or 2 before we ever acknowledged they had the capability. So if they have that capability, we need to be taking a look at that. But that's even more beside the point.
By doing what?
If it's a direct threat to the United States, then it's our problem. But it's not a direct threat to the United States. It's only a threat because we have our troops on the ground in the Middle East.
Bingo.
Or if they want to put nukes, unless they use nukes in international shipping lanes, that's a totally different story. Then we would have to respond to that.
So now you hit the nail on the head.
Let me bring the Israelis in for a second here.
Yeah, well, I just want to say you hit the nail on the head, and we'll come back to the Israelis because hold on, we'll come back to the Israelis.
They are a direct threat to the Israelis from a nuclear weapons perspective, and if the Israelis see a need from their national security perspective to take their targets out on their nuclear side, who could disagree with them? But the United States doesn't need to be involved in that.
Bingo. Okay, great. Right. Again, this is not the United States' situation. This is not the United States' war.
Can't be attacking
and I challenge anyone out there to tell me how it's in our interest to go to war with Iran. How is it in our interest to go to basically, not only that, we would torpedo everything we're trying to accomplish in Ukraine on a peace deal because the Russians would back the Iranians. This would be a World War III situation for us to go to war with Iran. I think it's madness. I think you hit the nail on the head. There's no benefit to the United States. It does benefit Israel. But again,
but Israel has that. Israel has the capability they need to address the situation if they feel that they're about to get attacked by nuclear weapons from Iran. Now, having the United States presence on the high seas there and those kind of things is not a bad thing if somebody does decide to attack Iran's nuclear forces. Because remember, China and Russia are both involved in this. More concerned about China than anybody else because they're running free in those oceans too, and they're not getting attacked by the Houthis and the Iranians because they're friends with them. So you have to have some kind of hedge there to prevent any further outbreak because there's the real World War III right there. It's what I've been saying since we started this stupidity with Ukraine, is that we are on the brink of a complete global World War III. And the facts don't support not doing anything, but they also don't support going further into a kinetic conflict, especially against Iran, when you don't really need to. I go back to the maximum pressure campaign. I think the president and his team originally had the right idea, and I'm voting for that.
Can I ask you this? That's a difficult question. Why does Israel have the right to have nuclear weapons and lie to the American people about it, lie to JFK about it, lie to Eisenhower about it? Why do the Iranians not get to have nuclear weapons?
Well, first of all, they got them at a different time, number one. Number two, they haven't been, they're threatening to wipe different types of peoples off the face of the earth using them. They've used them as really a deterrence capability. They've never used them in anger, haven't even threatened publicly to use them in anger. The difference between the mullahs and the Israelis when it comes to that type of weaponry is so dramatic that it's unthinkable that we would let the Islamist Nazis, and that's what they are, have nuclear weapons that they could fire into Europe, fire into the rest of the Middle East, fire into Eurasia, and eventually be able to fire onto the United States. They don't have that capability right now, but trust me, they will go after it once they do that breakout. Are they broken out? I think they're broken out already with like I said, between 3 and 7 warheads.
Well, what the fuck are you talking about? This? See, this dude just talking to Clayton. Come on, bro. Goddamn. I should have shown my people this bullshit. This dude just said if they break out. Oh yeah, I forgot. I told y'all they already broke out. Well, they probably got about 3 or 4. Well, the Islamist Nazis got 3 or 4 nuclear weapons, and you talking about bombing their nuclear sites, bro? Hey, don't that mean the Islamist Nazis is gonna nuke people? What does the dude? What the see? Just talking his ass off. The Islamist Nazis. They got to do what Islamist Nazis got nuclear weapons, bro. What are you gonna do? This is crazy.
And they have the capability to deliver them medium range because of the missile capabilities they have. But they aren't even close to being able to hit the United States with it, although our forces would be in grave danger if they decided they were going to go use this. So the Islamo-Nazis do crazy things. You cannot rely upon them to be stable. You cannot rely upon them to be rational actors. And that's what has made the Cold War possible. And the victory there is that both the Russians, the Soviets, and the Americans were rational actors. The Chinese communists and the Americans are rational actors. Israel fits into that same category. The Islamo-Nazis, they don't fit into that category. And they are hell-bent on destroying the state of Israel and wiping it off the face of the earth, no matter what the situation is and what warrants it. It's why we keep an eye on Pakistan very, very closely, and the Indians. They both are nuclear weapon states, and so far have been rational actors and have used it for the deterrent capability that they designed them and fielded them for, which is against each other. But there's no confidence amongst anybody that I know.
It's all right for India and Pakistan to have nuclear weapons as long as they use them on each other. This guy's a disgusting punk.
From a Western perspective, that the Iranians be the same way.
Oh man, well, we pissed off a lot of people in the chat room today.
No, he did.
Daniel says, "Damn, Clayton, that's a dumb question about." And then MSW says, "Yep, well said, Clayton." So you can't make anyone happy, but it's.
Well, if Donald Trump want to be the last U.S. president, go ahead and start attacking Iran.
Johnson, welcome here, my dear friend. Do you think that European elites, the leaders of the EU or the leaders of NATO without the US, are preparing for war with Russia?
They're talking it, and they're trying to make preparations. The problem is they don't have the material means to do so. They don't have the industrial production. They don't have the military strength. But they are, in terms of their words, they are certainly hell-bent on trying to start it. I haven't learned a thing from history, that's for sure.
Is this one of those things where they're unpopular, their economies are weak, talking about Starmer, Macron, van der Leyen, and to a lesser degree, or maybe the same degree, correct me, Friedrich Merz, the chancellor in waiting for Germany. And so when all else fails, they take you to war. Does that explain their bellicosity?
In part, but I think there's also some economic ties that are behind the scenes that we don't know about. I think in the case of the UK, they've actually made loans to Ukraine, and fully hoping that they'd get paid back handsomely. Now that's going down the toilet. So really, this isn't so much a Europe problem as it is a UK, France, Germany problem. Maloney in Italy has looked at them basically and said, "You guys are crazy. We're not doing that."
Right.
The same with Orban, Vito, in Slovakia. I think it was Sanchez in Spain. So Starmer tried to rally everybody to say, "Hey, follow me, guys, let's go," and goes running out the door. Like that scene from Animal House when John Belushi says, "Oh, let's go," and goes out the door by himself. That's Starmer.
You have explained to us just how reduced in size and weak in offensive capability the British military is. What can you tell us about the French and the German?
They're really in the same boat. It's not the issue is not so much the number of soldiers, the number of personnel in the army in both cases. I mean, that's important. But what's really important is, do they have the logistic capability? Are those militaries capable of providing the food, the ammunition, the fuel, and repairs for equipment, repairs on weapons that would be needed if these folks actually got deployed into combat? Across the board, Germany and France are not what they were in, say, 1940. Both were formidable military powers in Europe, almost 90 years ago. That's not the case today. They are a shrunken image of themselves. They've become the Lilliputians.
What would become of them if they purported to establish some sort of a security guarantee with troops on the ground in Ukraine?
Russia will attack and kill them. They'll be dead. They'll be stacking bodies. Russia already has been hitting a variety of hotels where these, quote, foreign mercenaries are staying. And we now know, thanks to a report in the New York Times over the weekend, that the U.S. CIA personnel and military personnel have been sent to forward areas as well. So we don't even know how many of them have been killed, because the West has been very careful to try to hide that information, so that it's not, they're not openly talking about the kinds of casualties they're suffering. One, because if news of that gets out, it could really turn public opinion against them. And two, that would give Russia more, actually a casus belli to recognize that the United States and Europe have been committing an act of war against Russia.
Did I understand you to say that this Times article reported that American active duty troops or American mercenaries were in Ukraine?
Active duty military personnel.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and CIA.
That means that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth sent them there, right?
Well, they were there. This was under Biden, and I'm sure it's continued under Trump. But this is, Adam Enthouse wrote the article, and it's a massive. It's like War and Peace. It's as if Tolstoy wrote the thing. It has 4 parts, and it's sort of a history of the war in Ukraine. Basically, what it is to say, man, the United States, we did all this great stuff, and Ukraine should have won, but they ignored us. So it's all Ukraine's fault that they're losing. That's the point of the article.
Okay.
But in it, they get into the fact that the United States was helping plan and organize every major attack that Ukraine has carried out against Russia, including strikes inside Russia.
If we are still doing that, then how can the United States purport to be the mediator for a peaceful resolution between Russia and Ukraine any more than it can purport to be a mediator between Hamas and the Israelis? We're co-belligerent.
Yeah.
In the case of Hamas, we're funding it. In the case of Ukraine, we're funding it, and we're identifying targets for them.
Yeah, it is. Number one, our bias is on our sleeve, and we got blood on our hands in both places. But it's sad that Trump doesn't even understand the situation with respect to Russia and Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky made it illegal. They got a law passed through the Rada, illegal for anyone in the Ukrainian government to talk to the Russians. Okay? So right off the bat, nobody, including Zelensky, can talk to the Russians because it's against Ukrainian law. And yet here's Trump saying, oh, I'm upset that Putin doesn't want to talk to Zelensky. Putin can't talk to Zelensky.
So General Zaluzhny, who's now the Ukrainian ambassador to Great Britain and living in London, cannot, without the risk of being prosecuted, conduct any back channel negotiations.
Correct. Yeah, it's until Ukraine reverses that law, there's not going to be any, quote, conversations between Russia and Ukraine. So it's like, you know, is nobody briefing Donald Trump, or is he just ignoring the briefings?
So
I mean, this is really this is a level of ignorance that's embarrassing. This is like basic foreign policy 101. Know the facts. And I mean, we saw it with Witkoff that, oh, those republics, I don't remember their name. Well, you damn well better know their names if you're going to be involved with these kinds of negotiations. This is, you're not working on a cheap walk-up apartment in Queens. This is life and death issues. Know the facts. And here's one fact for Donald Trump. Putin cannot, even if Putin tried to talk to Zelensky, Zelensky can't talk to him. It's against their law. But on top of it, Putin made it clear in June of 2024, and this was after Zelensky canceled elections, we're not going to talk to anybody in this illegal government because they violated their own constitution. They got to have elections, then we'll talk. But they're also going to have to withdraw that law.
So here's President Trump aboard Air Force One yesterday saying he's disappointed in Putin. And then I'm going to play a clip from Kristen Welker because she had a phone call with him. So this apparently isn't recorded, in which he says he's pissed off at Putin. But first, your thoughts on Trump on Air Force One. Chris, number 9.
And I was disappointed in a certain way. Some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because when he considers Zelensky not credible, he's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that, but I think he's going to be good. And I certainly wouldn't want to put secondary tariffs on Russia, but if they were put on, it would not be very good for them.
Does he really think he can interfere with Russia selling oil to China and India? I mean, does he know what he's talking about?
No. I mean, he just bombast all the way.
China stop buying oil.
Here's the guy that called Zelensky a dictator.
Right, and threw him out of the White House. Not physically, but made him leave.
He's miffed that Putin doesn't want to talk to Zelensky. Like I said, Zelensky has made it illegal for any Ukrainian to talk to Putin, even if Putin was wanting to. But Putin's made it clear they are not a legitimate government, and that's this is not a news flash. This hasn't been some deep dark secret held within the bowels of the CIA. I mean, good God, we've known this now for almost a year.
Yeah,
and yet Trump doesn't grasp that concept. And he thinks
I know you're not a fan, and neither am I, of Jeffrey Goldberg, but his reading of the texts that he got. Well, here's what he said. Cut number 4, Chris.
What J.D. Vance is saying in the group chat, which included, as you know, much of the cabinet, much of the president's cabinet. He's saying the president doesn't even understand what he's doing here. So I found that remarkable, obviously, given that J.D. Vance has tried very hard to make sure that he's 100% aligned with what Trump says. Here we have a serious, substantive conversation where he's telling members of the cabinet, members of the president's own cabinet, that no, he doesn't even get it. So sure, that is interesting, and I would have to imagine that caused a little disturbance in the force in the White House.
We'll get back to Ukraine in a minute, but is it now common understanding that the president often doesn't know what he's talking about?
Yeah, I think Trump at a very simplistic level looks at, he calls the Houthis barbarians, terrorists. He he doesn't understand that the Houthis is really it's not a ethnic group. It's a group based upon a particular clan and an individual in this particular tribe, and the people that are adherents, pledge loyalty to him, but they're Shia. They're not Sunni. They have no relationship whatever with Al Qaeda. In fact, they've opposed the radical Sunni Islamic terrorism that was advocated by those who attacked us on 9/11, those that we were saying that we're trying to wipe out ISIS. And so Trump doesn't even understand that. And he lumps them in with the very people that, the Houthis haven't been killing Americans. They haven't been attacking Americans.
And yet the president of peace, as he refers to himself, has ordered 65 bombings of these helpless, defenseless people 10,000 miles away in 48 hours. Yeah. 65 sorties, plane going out, dropping bombs, plane coming back, one sortie. 65 of these in 48 hours from the man of peace. Chris, play the Kristen Welker summary of her phone call with the president, where he said he was pissed off at Vladimir Putin.
Just hours ago, President Trump called me to tell me he is, quote, pissed off with Russia's President Putin and threatened to impose secondary tariffs on Russia's oil. Quote, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on all oil coming out of Russia. Mr. Trump said 25% tariffs on Russian oil could happen any moment and told me he plans to speak with President Putin this week. The president told me, quote, I was very angry, pissed off when Putin started getting into Zelensky's credibility and started talking about new leadership in Ukraine.
Now, here's President Putin on President Zelensky's credibility. Cut number 15, Chris.
The current civil authorities in Ukraine have no legitimacy in accordance with the country's constitution. Ukraine has held no presidential election, while according to the constitution, all key officials are to be appointed by the president, including regional government bodies, governors, and so on. So if the president is illegitimate, so are all the others. So under these circumstances of de facto illegitimacy, neo-Nazi formations receive additional weapons and recruit new personnel. What does this lead to? What could it lead to? It results in de facto power being in their hands. This in turn means that it is already unclear with whom to sign documents and what effect such documents might carry. For tomorrow, new leaders may come to power through elections and declare, we do not know who signed those papers, so goodbye. The issue is not just this uncertainty. It is that these neo-Nazi formations, such as Azov, among others, are effectively beginning to run the country. This raises the question, how is it possible to conduct negotiations with them? In such situations, international practice follows a well-established path. Within the framework of the United Nations peacekeeping operations, there have been several cases of what is termed external governance or temporary administration. This occurred in East Timor, I believe in 1999, in parts of the former Yugoslavia, and in New Guinea. In short, such precedents exist.
I guess it's kind of obvious who has the better grasp of what's going on between Trump and Putin.
Yeah, in fact, if Putin and Trump talk this week, what you just heard Vladimir Putin say, he'll say the same thing to Trump. Say it in the same way. He's not going to, not going to dress it up, not going to dress it down. It's a very matter of fact, and it's logical what he's, his assessment of the situation, and that's where Trump can threaten all the tariffs he wants. That's why last week, a week and a half ago, in a speech that Putin gave to the industrialists, he told them, he says, look, stop thinking that we're going to ever have a relationship with the West where we won't have to worry about sanctions and tariffs. That's never going away. So that's why we have to seek to build alternative financial structures,
right?
So we don't have to worry about that. That's
according,
where we're going. I mean, and he's not upset about it. He's not making threats. You do this or else. He's just saying, hey, guys, look, this is the situation. This is the reality. Instead of us sitting here moaning about the reality, let's just go build a new structure.
And according to Alistair Crook this morning, Larry, those alternative structures have been wildly successful economically. Well, you and I were just in Moscow and we were bowled away at the economic prosperity that we saw. Even when we were out in the countryside, we saw it. That the sanctions haven't laid a glove on the Russian economy. But my question to you is, does Donald Trump run the risk of sabotaging the negotiations in Riyadh by his impatience and his personal attacks on Vladimir Putin?
Yes, yeah, and to add to it, if he follows through on his threat to bomb Iran, then not only will he just destroy any hope of a solid relationship with Putin and or Xi, but very well could push us to into World War III. I mean, it's extremely dangerous. It's extremely foolish. Trump entered office with an opportunity to genuinely remake the world in terms of peace, and instead of using military force, using diplomacy and using the coercion of America's military and economic power with Israel to compel Israel to make some concessions and to stop the murder of the Palestinians. But instead, he's become an enabler. So we are enabling genocide, which means we got as much blood on our hands as those actually carrying out the crime. We're now killing children, civilians in Yemen, on the pretext of we're going to stop them from, attacking ships that are bound for Israel. And then at the same time, we're threatening to go to war with Iran. And by that, he's put 5 B-2 bombers with 2 more apparently supposed to arrive in Diego Garcia. And there are already 2 B-52s stationed there. Apparently they went back, they were there since last March, March of 2024. So, these are all the wrong signs. And now we get this New York Times article where they're admitting the United States has been actively involved with directing, organizing, funding, supplying, training these attacks that have been carried out inside Russia. These are acts of war. If Russia had done that to us, we would have probably gone nuclear.
And the Kremlin is obviously listening to what the vice president and the president have to say about Greenland. Cut number 1, Chris.
So the U.S. has really serious plans about Greenland. These plans, as I've already said, have old historic origins. And it's obvious that the U.S. will further systematically promote their geostrategic, military, politic, and economic interest in the Arctic. But we are also concerned about the fact that NATO countries in general are increasingly designating the far north as a springboard for possible conflicts. They train the development of troops under these conditions, including the participation of their new recruits, Finland and Sweden. By the way, until recently, we did not have any problems with them at all. I will stress, Russia has never threatened anyone in the Arctic, but we are closely monitoring the development of the situation and build an adequate line of response by means of increase of the combat capabilities of the armed forces and modernization of the military infrastructure facilities. We will not allow any infringements of our country's sovereignty and will reliably protect our national interests.
Translation: if the 101st Airborne shows up in Greenland.
Well, yeah, Russia won't react to that. But what is going on up in the Baltic Sea? Just last week, a Russian ship illuminated a French combat aircraft, and basically they were facing the prospect of getting shot down if they didn't evacuate the area. They left. So the tensions are increasing. Trump's trying to get the United States involved in the Arctic. Well, we only have, I think, one, maybe two icebreakers right now. Now he cuts a deal with Finland that they're going to get 3 more. Okay, woohoo! Russia's got 40 and is building more. So we're not even in the same league in terms of being actually able to deploy naval assets in that region and have them operate. Plus, Russia routinely operates up there and is working with China to get China, because it's seen as a passage for shipping that can actually cut costs on the shipping side. So Trump, maybe deserves some credit for recognizing that it's a problem, but his problem solving on this by basically demonstrating U.S. imperialism, that we're going to go out and take a country, just take it. We decide we want it, we're going to take it. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't think that's what America should stand for. I was always raised, keep your damn hands to yourself. Don't go out hitting other people.
Yes.
They seem to have this obsession to go hit other people.
I don't think there's a popular will for it. I think most people share your view, Larry. It's just my feeling about it. Or most people just take it as some sort of a boastful statement that he made because he wants to negotiate something else, and this is one of his negotiating techniques. I don't think people take him seriously when he says these things. We'll see. Larry, a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for all of your thoughts. Thanks for your time. We'll see you Friday with Professor McGovern.
Okay. Great.
Is Politico really telling us that Donald Trump might do some unprovoked aggression? Where are those people who have lectured Russia and criticized Russia over the last 3 years? I don't see them lined up here in a queue expressing their outrage at Donald Trump. They're all silent as a mouse. Unprovoked Russian aggression in Ukraine. Not in Greenland, of course, not in Greenland. Hello, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. Today is Monday, the 31st of March, and this is my first video update of the day. I hope you have some popcorn at hand, because this is going to be an interesting one. We have Donald Trump, who's warning Russia. He says he's pissed off with Vladimir Putin. And then also we have the same Donald Trump who says he will 100% take over Greenland. Well, who would have thought? An unprovoked aggression of sorts. And then we have the green t-shirt himself, who's preparing for summer elections. Another surprising thing. When Vladimir Putin talked about the elections in Ukraine, well, of course, that was propaganda. What are you even talking about? When the green t-shirt talks about elections in Ukraine, of course, that's just democracy. You see, when something comes from Vladimir Putin, it immediately gets the label as Russian propaganda, as expected, of course. But if the same thing comes from the green t-shirt, well, those are just the ways of democracy. Don't we live in a beautiful world, my friends? Let us begin with Ukrainska Pravda, the beacon of democracy, and let's hear something from Donald Trump. Pissed off with Putin, Trump threatens Russia with tariffs on all oil. Quote, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it was Russia's fault, I'm going to put secondary tariffs on oil, on all oil coming out of Russia, Trump said during an early morning phone call with NBC News on Sunday, the 30th of March. Russia was willing to negotiate an end to this conflict right from its very start, from 2022. Vladimir Putin and the rest of the Russian government, they've never really shut the door on diplomacy. The only difference is that the West, including the United States, they want an end to this conflict that looks more like a frozen conflict, like Korea style. But Russia, they don't want that. What they want is a permanent solution to this conflict by taking into account Russia's security concerns, which are ultimately the root causes of the conflict. That's where everything broke down in discussions in between Russia, the European Union, the United States, and the rest of the West, because the West doesn't want to take Russia's security concerns into account. Now, getting back to Donald Trump, he's saying that he's pissed in case Russia doesn't want to negotiate. Again, I'll stress the same point. The way Russia wants to negotiate is by taking into account the root causes of the conflict. The United States, on the other hand, they have no interest in doing that because ultimately United States is NATO, and NATO enlargement was one of the root causes which has led to the start of this conflict. That's why the West has very little interest in taking Russia's security concerns into account. With that being said, what would that mean, what Donald Trump is saying? Imposing secondary tariffs on Russian oil, on all Russian oil. I assume that includes oil products. Well, let me show you these two charts which I found this morning. Who is buying Russia's fossil fuels? And by the way, this is from 2025. Now, I will zoom in on these two parts, crude oil and oil products. As far as crude oil is concerned, we have China and India. They are by far the largest buyers of Russian oil. But when it comes to oil products, we have Turkey, we have China, we have Brazil, we have Singapore, and many others. Is Donald Trump willing to risk bad relations with those countries which are very powerful? Because of what? On the basis of what? Is this really so important to Donald Trump? And the answer is no, it's not. Personally, I think it's a bluff. But let's see what he says after. Trump said this would mean that if you buy oil from Russia, you won't be able to do business in the United States. A tariff of between 25 and 50% would be imposed on all Russian oil. And it's precisely because this line right here that I think Donald Trump is bluffing. Is he really going to risk China not doing business in the United States because they're buying Russian oil? I mean, please. The United States needs China's business, just as much as we humans need air. It's not an accusation. It's a reality. It's a fact. It is what it is. The United States will never risk its economy over Ukraine in any way, shape, or form. However, he says something else. He added that tariffs on Russia would be introduced within a month if no ceasefire agreement is reached. At the same time, the US president reiterated that he has a very good relationship with Putin and said that the anger dissipates quickly if he does the right thing. Well, this doesn't sound very inspiring, does it? This reminds me of the good old gangster movies. It would be a shame if something was to happen to your business because you didn't pay up. But if you pay up, we have the solution. Your business will be protected. That's what this sounds like. Also, I'm pretty certain that Vladimir Putin will sleep tonight just fine, even though Donald Trump is threatening oil sanctions. It's not the first time when somebody threatens Russia with sanctions, when somebody imposes sanctions on Russia. I think the Russian nation has learned how to live under these sort of threats and sanctions. Also, there's another point I want to emphasize here. Donald Trump, he stated that he wants to work together with the BRICS nations, and he doesn't want the BRICS nations to de-dollarize. Well, these types of statements, they don't help, because this is exactly what has led to the de-dollarization process. The fear of the world of having the dollar used against them as a weapon. And these are the exact type of statements that Donald Trump is now resorting to. I think this also showcases a lack of leverage, of real leverage, over Russia. Anyway, let's move on, because he has something to say about the green t-shirt. You know, he's not just pointing the stick at the Russians, he's also pointing it at the green t-shirt. Trump warns Zelensky of big problems if Ukraine rejects mineral deal. Quote, he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal, and if he does that, he's got some problems. Big problems. Quote, he wants to be a member of NATO, but he's never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that, he said. Well, I've talked a lot about this mineral deal over the last couple of days. I don't think there's something left to be said there. And in my honest opinion, the green t-shirt cannot possibly sign that deal. That's basically signing your country away. And that's not an exaggeration, by the way. And again, I'll stress this point one last time. This is not just about minerals. This is about infrastructure. This is about decision-making power. You see, we live in a multipolar world, and Donald Trump knows that. the Ukraine mineral deal is not necessarily about minerals. It's about power and control. It's about expressing power across the globe. It's about power projection, if you will. He also understands that Ukraine will be in dire straits once this conflict ends and the support from their friends dries up. And that's exactly when China and Russia can make their way into the Ukrainian economy, which would absolutely take away from the United States' share of the pie, because that's how a hegemon thinks. Everything is his own backyard. That's why Donald Trump wants to secure Ukraine with that mineral deal, even if there's no minerals in them. That's really the point there. Now, as for NATO, I think basically the green t-shirt is trying to get something that he can sell to the Ukrainian population. Like, look, this is why I'm signing this deal, because we are getting something good out of it. Because in the current state, he cannot possibly sign it without having his political future, at the very least, under threat. Let's just put it that way. That's why he still talks about NATO, even though Trump says, well, he knows he's not going to get into NATO. With that in mind, let's shift our focus to Greenland, another piece de la résistance. Trump doesn't rule out military intervention in Greenland. Again, is Politico really telling us that Donald Trump might do some unprovoked aggression? Where are those people who have lectured Russia and criticized Russia over the last 3 years? I don't see them lined up here in a queue expressing their outrage at Donald Trump. They're all silent as a mouse. Unprovoked Russian aggression in Ukraine. Not in Greenland, of course, not in Greenland. US President Donald Trump hinted he could use military force to take over Greenland in the latest sign of Washington's fixation with the autonomous territory in the Kingdom of Denmark. Quote, "We'll get Greenland." Yeah, 100%, Trump told NBC. There's a good possibility it could be done without military force, he said, adding, however, that I don't take anything off the table. Well, that sounds like a potential case of unprovoked aggression. At least that's what it sounds like to me. But on a serious note, why is the United States so fixated with Greenland? Well, that's one of their blind spots, so to speak, the Arctic region. You see, Russia and China, but especially Russia, they're making a lot of headway with regards to developing technologies that suit the Arctic region, and also creating trade routes and other things. Russia also has military bases in the Arctic. Russia is much more advanced when it comes to the Arctic than everybody else on the planet. The United States is now trying to catch up, and they've used their own means to catch up, and that failed. I don't think they have a single working icebreaker. I might be wrong, but even if they do, it's something not to the same level that the Russians have, which is why Donald Trump played golf a few days ago with Mr. Alexander Stubb, the Finnish president, and the game went according to plan. Mr. Stubb is willing to sell icebreakers now to the United States. That's why the US is so fixated on Greenland. And that's exactly the same reason, by the way, for why the United States is so focused and fixated on Ukraine's mineral deal. Again, it's the same mindset. In a multipolar world, you're trying to take as many things off of the chessboard for your opponent. By taking Greenland, well, the United States establishes itself in the Arctic region, and also, obviously, in Ukraine as well. That's how... This is just big power politics. This is not soft power anymore. Now we are transitioning to full hard power from the United States. And I think this is not the end of it. This is just the beginning. Let's move on to the next and final article. Elections in Ukraine, the green t-shirt. Zelensky preparing for summer elections, says The Economist. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky may hold elections as early as this summer, and he intends to run for a second term, The Economist reports. Ukrainian officials have told the outlet that Zelensky convened a meeting last week instructing his team to prepare for an election to take place after a full ceasefire, which according to US estimates could be achieved by the end of April. The report names Easter Sunday, the 20th of April, as a possible date. Well, I don't know what to make of this, my friends. To me, this sounds a little bit too convenient. Let me elaborate. Just a few days ago, the reports started coming in the Western mainstream media that the Russians are preparing a huge offensive that should last in between 6 and 9 months. Obviously, Ukraine is not prepared for such defensive operations, which is why I think this is the fallback plan. Look, just tell the world that you're ready to organize elections, and maybe, just maybe, you get the Russians not to begin this offensive. I think that's the ploy here, because Vladimir Putin himself talked about elections in Ukraine just a few days ago. And of course, as you would expect, it was received with a lot of backlash. Of course, we won't do that. Who are you to tell us? You know the thing. But now, all of a sudden, Volodymyr Zelensky talks about elections. Isn't this too convenient? I think, I'm inclined to believe that this is just a ploy to try to convince the Russians not to begin the offensive that will basically end the conflict. I think that's the ploy here, and of course the United States is in on it. Let's continue. Petro Poroshenko, leader of Ukraine's largest opposition party, European Solidarity, predicts the elections could take place any time from August to October. He claims the campaign has already begun with Zelensky's controversial decision to impose sanctions against him in February. How can they say that with a straight face, saying that Poroshenko is Zelensky's opposition and his party is European Solidarity? Really, European Solidarity doesn't exactly sound like Zelensky's opposition, but like Zelensky's patrons. You see, what will probably happen in Ukraine if elections will be organized and if Poroshenko wins, you're just replacing the main actor. But the rest of the stage doesn't change. The people behind the scenes don't change. Everything stays the same. But you just replace one figurehead with another figurehead. European Solidarity, Zelensky's opposition, really? The Economist adds that both Putin and Trump may now prefer to avoid snap elections. Quote, both presumably demanded one, believing it would lead to Mr. Zelensky's exit. Given that the calculation has flipped upside down, they might not sit quiet while he fast-tracks his progress to a second term. Mr. Putin holds many of the cards here. His drones and missiles could make canceling martial law, let alone holding a vote, impossible. Of course, there's a little bit of truth in this election story, and that's because Volodymyr Zelensky, he understands that sooner or later, elections will have to take place, one way or another. So, usually, the best thing to do is to just get ahead of the problem and try to control the environment as much as possible. That's why he's now talking about elections. However, there's also the plan B. If the ceasefire doesn't materialize, well, in that case, he won't have to go through with this, and at least he's expressing to the world that, look, I'm a democratic leader, I'm willing to hold the elections, but this guy from the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, I can't do it because of him. So plan A and plan B right over there. My friends, I'll leave this episode here. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you
$25. And Trump is apparently not happy with anybody, as he has been lashing out at both Russian President Putin and Ukrainian leader Zelensky just in the last 24 hours. I want to go over the comments that Trump made, what he's saying, what he's threatening, and what that looks like realistically. Because if there's anything that we've learned about Donald Trump, it's that he loves to threaten sanctions, right? He loves to threaten tariffs and to claim that he is really going to take on a certain country, like in this case, Russia. But what does that actually mean, right? If the US decides it's going to put tariffs on countries that, in this case, as Trump is threatening, that buy Russian oil, what does that look like in the real world? And is there anyone who is going to comply? Short answer is no, not even the EU. So we are going to be getting into all of that here in today's video. But before we do, Jax wants to come say hi really quick. He has figured out the life hack that when he comes and hangs out with me and is a part of my video, then he gets a treat afterwards. Would you like a treat? All right, we'll get one in just a second. But he would also like you to know that your support makes my work possible. And so if you want to sign up as a monthly paid subscriber, you can do so right now over on my pages on Substack and Patreon. You can also send a one-time donation on my page on Buy Me a Coffee. I'll leave all of the information in the description below. I am going to go get the little man his treat, and then I will be right back. And I'm back. All right, let's get into the comments that Trump made on Sunday when he was on a phone interview with a reporter from NBC News. That's where he was quoted as saying, if we're in the midst of a negotiation, you could say that I was very angry, pissed off when Putin said yesterday that, when Putin started getting into Zelensky's credibility, because that's not going in the right location. You understand? So Trump there is reacting to comments that Putin made just last week, where he was bringing up concerns about Zelensky's credibility as the president of Ukraine. Because, of course, we all know that the 5-year term that Zelensky began back in 2019 came to an end in May 2024. And Ukraine has not held elections since then. So you have a bit of a crisis here for Kiev, and that they're now over a year past due from these presidential elections. Zelensky's staying in power because he maintains martial law in the country, and that includes a number of different powers that he is enjoying right now. And this is not the first time we've heard Russia bring up these concerns. In fact, Russia started bringing up these concerns about this time last year, if not even earlier, pointing to the fact that Ukraine had not had elections, Zelensky was not legitimate. And so this is something that Putin has brought up time and time again, of saying, hey, we are not able to sign any kind of deal, any kind of agreement with Zelensky because he's not the legitimate president. So where does that leave Russia? With Putin's latest comments, he suggested discussing the establishment of a temporary government in Ukraine under the guidance of the United Nations and several countries. The aim would be to hold fair elections in the country. Putin noted that Moscow sees no clear way to sign any agreements with Kiev, since other leaders might come tomorrow. Now, I don't know if Trump has figured out that Russia is stalling here. And it is completely within their right to stall, right? Let's be clear about that. Russia is actively winning the war in Ukraine. They do not need a ceasefire. They do not need a peace deal tomorrow. Now, they have made it clear that they're happy to continue to have dialogue. However, they're not going to make a deal tomorrow. So, in order to get out of that without explicitly saying, yeah, no, we're not going to make a deal with you, you have Putin in this place of continuing to bring up the obstacles that stand between where we are now and a potential peace deal aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. And it's exactly what he's doing with this election business, where he's saying, hey, Ukraine needs to have elections. Why don't we get on that? Why don't we have and make sure that Kiev has a legitimate elected leader in office before Russia agrees to any sort of peace deal? We sign it with Zelensky. Who's to say that Europe can't just turn around and say this isn't actually legitimate? And then they continue on with some sort of version of the Minsk Accords, where we have a bit of a frozen conflict. NATO rearms the regime in Kiev. And then we're back right where we are now with more war. And you can see Trump start to get frustrated here, as if he thought that because Putin was agreeing to talks, and that meant that we were going to get a peace deal very, very soon. I know there were reports going around months ago saying that they had an Easter Sunday or April 20th deadline for a ceasefire. So you have Trump in this position of kind of realizing finally maybe he's getting out of the denial stage of grief and a bit into the anger stage, as we're seeing with him lashing out. He's starting to realize that, okay, maybe I'm not going to get some done deal for Ukraine, some sort of full ceasefire by that April 20th deadline that his administration reportedly set for itself. But it also brings up the fact that Putin is not the only one who has raised concerns about the fact that Ukraine hasn't had elections. Trump himself, literally last month, was also raising concerns when he was speaking out and calling Zelensky a, quote, dictator without elections. Trump himself was raising concerns that Putin is now also speaking about. Yet Trump acts as though he never made any of those statements whatsoever. I know he then followed that up with when he was asked by reporters about his comment that he made about Zelensky, he said something to the effect of, oh, did I say that? It's like, yeah, you did say that. You said that in a post on Truth Social. Maybe it was someone else writing it. Maybe they got the interpretation wrong. But the fact is that you are the president of the United States. You are responsible for the words that come out of your mouth and the posts that are made from your accounts on Truth Social. And if you didn't say that, then you need to come back out and make a correction. But we have not heard a correction other than Trump's one comment during that interview, which I don't think necessarily counts. I think that's just Trump being Trump. But it is ironic that within just a few weeks' time, Trump literally goes from calling Zelensky a dictator, saying that Ukraine needs to have elections, to then deciding he's going to be the guy to stand up for Ukraine, for Zelensky's quote unquote credibility. And now all of a sudden, not only is he lashing out and saying that he's pissed off at Vladimir Putin, but he's also including threats. And he's openly threatening new tariffs, saying, quote, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on oil, on all oil coming out of Russia. That would be that if you buy oil from Russia, you can't do business in the United States. There will be a 25% tariff on all oil, a 25 to 50-point tariff on all oil. Okay, so what does that actually mean? Because we have to remember here that it's not as if Russia is just some small country and there are just a handful of other countries that it does business with that import Russian oil. Oh no, Russia is one of the largest exporters of oil and also all natural resources on this planet. Therefore, when the US, when Trump decides that he's going to make threats like this, it really is just laughable at this point. Because we have to remember, as Al Jazeera reported in 2019, that 48 countries imported more than $123 billion worth of Russian crude oil. And while, yes, that was 6 years ago, that still includes the rest of Europe, as reports noted last month that the EU spent more on Russian oil and gas in 2024 at 22 billion euros than they did on aid for Ukraine at 19 billion euros. So for the countries that import Russian oil and that rely heavily on it, including the countries within the EU, I don't exactly expect them to just completely change course because Trump is now threatening a 25% tariff on them if they keep importing Russian oil. If they didn't make any significant changes during the Biden administration, I do not see them doing that now. And it would be better for Trump if he would realize early on that this war is not going to end overnight. It's not possible for it to end overnight. Even if Russia came out tomorrow, which I do not expect them to do, and they said, you know what, we're just going to draw the battle lines where they are right now, well, you still have serious issues that have to be dealt with, including, as Putin has noted, that we have to decide how are we going to enforce the battle lines that are drawn, right? How are we going to enforce the fact that right now, not only is Kiev continuing to violate what was supposed to be a ceasefire on the targeting of energy infrastructure, but you also have the fact that Kiev is actively trying to launch a new incursion into Russia's Belgorod region. So I can see why not only is Russia not going to agree to anything overnight, but it is not physically possible to have any kind of peace deal, to enforce any kind of peace deal, and on top of that, to ensure that Kiev is actually going to do its part on its end, and then it's not going to fall apart, just like what was attempted to be a temporary partial ceasefire. Meanwhile, you have Zelensky attempting to capitalize on Trump's latest frustration with Putin, calling for tough measures against Russia to push Putin into a ceasefire agreement and insisting that Moscow couldn't care less about diplomacy. And yes, that is the same Zelensky who claims to have both a peace plan and a victory plan that literally involve NATO starting World War III against Russia. Not only is he not interested in peace here, but he's literally trying to drag Trump into more endless war, right? Put more sanctions on Russia, put tariffs on other countries that trade with Russia, as if that is going to force Moscow to the negotiating table when we all know that it's not, right? The media here in the West knows that it's not. And yet they still continue to play this game where they act like, oh yeah, there are other ways that the US could be putting pressure on Russia. Yeah, is it going to win them the war in Ukraine? No, they know that, and everyone else knows that too. Now, unfortunately for Zelensky, his moment of trying to get Trump on his side was apparently short-lived because Trump is also mad at Zelensky. Because as all of this is happening, we also have this forthcoming minerals deal that is supposed to be signed between the US and Ukraine, giving the US access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals. And we still don't know exactly what is included in that deal, but it's being reported that it does not include the years of security guarantees that Kiev is trying to get from Washington. And now you have Trump also threatening Zelensky, saying, quote, I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal, and if he does that, he's got some problems, big problems. We made a deal on rare earth, and now he's saying, well, I want to renegotiate the deal. He wants to be a member of NATO. Well, he was never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that. So if he's looking to renegotiate the deal, he's got big problems. Trump. He has got to figure out how to handle this situation better, or maybe more realistically, because he cannot keep going around throwing out these threats of sanctions and tariffs and, oh, Zelensky has to do this and Putin has to do that. And my biggest question when looking at this situation is going to be, how long does Trump continue to go at this pace? Now, is it smart for him to continue talks with Russia? Absolutely. But when it comes to Ukraine, he needs to decide, how much does the US want to be involved here? Because I do not expect them to pass any massive aid packages for Ukraine anytime soon. I don't think that the US has the capabilities, even if they are, to claim, oh, we're going to give Ukraine this amount of military aid and that amount of military aid. They're not in a place to fulfill all of those obligations, at least not right away. And so Trump is facing the question of, how long does he want to continue to stay in Ukraine? Does he decide that the US needs to pull out now, right? Does he pull back on US support and allow Kiev to fall flat on its face and then point his finger at Europe and claim, oh, they are the problem, right? They're the ones who were supposed to be responsible for Kiev, and they did not fulfill their end of the bargain, and they could not handle things once the US pulled out? Or does he continue quietly providing military aid, quietly providing intelligence sharing with Kiev, and continuing these talks with Russia while slowly but surely figuring out that Moscow is not going to agree to a deal on the timeline that Trump wants them to? Because as we're seeing right now, Trump loves to throw threats around. Now he's threatening Iran, right? He's threatening Russia, he's threatening Ukraine. But what it makes him look like is the toddler who's throwing a temper tantrum because they didn't get the toy that they wanted. And they're surrounded by a bunch of, I don't know that I would necessarily call Ukraine an adult, but they're surrounded by some adults and some spoiled children, in the case of Zelensky, let's say, who are looking at them and trying to figure out, okay, when is Trump going to get with the picture? Is he going to at all? And at what point do his threats become meaningless? At what point does he become the boy who cried wolf? When he sits there and he threatens sanctions and tariffs and other measures against countries all over the world. And then you get to the point where it's like, okay, Trump, these threats aren't working anymore. You're going to have to find a new way to negotiate, and you're going to have to negotiate like an adult. Because every time that I criticize Trump's statements or I raise the statements that he's making, I always get comments from people saying, oh, well, that's just how Trump does things, right? He makes these harsh threats and then he pulls back once he gets some of what he wants. And this is just the negotiating process. Well, if he wants to continue like that, he can try to do that. But I can already see the ways in which countries like Russia, and this is likely going to be China at some point in his second term, when they're already getting tired of dealing him of dealing with him like this. They're seeing past the way that he is trying to handle things, and they are already outsmarting him as he continues on with this game of checkers while a number of countries around the world are playing chess. And that's something everyone should be talking about.
Coffee, follow me.